Broken Lines by Matt Edsand. Narrated by Matt Edsand. Chapter 1 Meeting Room, United Alliance 14. Duncan looked at his brother. He couldn't remember how long it had been since he had seen him. It seemed like his brother had aged well. You look good. Williams frowned. I didn't expect you to start with that. Where else would I start? Williams raised his hands. I didn't mean anything by that. Okay, the past is the past. We don't need to go there. Is that really true? Duncan offered a single nod. He wasn't here to dredge up the past, not with humanity facing its greatest threat ever. If he wanted to trudge through the past with his brother, they could do it some other time. I got your message, Williams admitted. But you never replied to it. Do forgive me, brother. I was deep in Wiley Forest, tracking the first aliens that humanity has ever encountered when I saw your message. Duncan ignored the sarcasm lining his brother's voice. I'm glad you made it out safely. The aliens are extremely dangerous. What did you call these aliens? Williams asked. They're known as the Vazat. Williams nodded. I shouldn't have checked my messages in the middle of the hunt. That didn't help my sanity. Once I saw the message, I got distracted by it. I never expected you to send me a message. Duncan agreed. If not for the Vazat alien menace, he doubted he would have ever sent a message to his brother. He chose not to share the part that Joseph had forced him on the issue. I had no choice, considering everything happening around us. I figured as much. I was surprised you knew how to contact me. We have our ways. Williams paused for a long moment. What do we know of the Vazat aliens? Duncan shared with his brother everything that had happened since they had encountered the aliens. No point holding anything back, and none of the information was even classified. Williams whistled. Whoa! I'm impressed that your side managed to steal one of their vessels. That'll help us a lot. Duncan waited for his brother to share their intelligence. What about your side? His brother explained the coalition forces' encounters with the Vazat. Duncan listened carefully to every word, looking for anything that might give him a clue to the mission of the Vazat aliens. It seems like the Vazat aliens chose to attack both factions at the same time, Duncan mused. Which is significant, General. Duncan dismissed the tone in which his brother referred to his rank. Even growing up, his brother had a way of trying to get a reaction out of him. But now they were adults, and he wasn't going to fall for it. I think there are more humans helping the Vazat aliens. Williams frowned. I concur with your assessment. These traitors are the worst kind. So where do we go from here? Duncan cocked his head. What do you mean? Brother, in case you've forgotten, we are on opposite sides of a war. I'm aware of it. I've spoken to the United Alliance Council and they have proposed a ceasefire. At least until we figure out the intentions of the Vazat aliens and neutralize them. An open-ended ceasefire? Duncan gave a nod. I'll need to check in with my commanding officer and our council to get their approval. I expect nothing less. Williams cast an amused look at him. Looks like we'll be working together for a while. Who would have thought of it, right? Duncan didn't find any amusement in the whole matter. The conflict between the two factions had been going on for over 3 years. Both sides had suffered many losses. In principle, a ceasefire made the most logical sense. However, implementing it on the ground was a completely different problem. The ceasefire deal was currently being kept under wraps. Duncan hadn't even mentioned it to Captain Arya. There was no need to tell her until the coalition forces agreed to it. Even then, maintaining a ceasefire would be a challenge. The logistics of it was merely the tip of the iceberg. And then there were the matter of the soldiers. Assuming the ceasefire came into effect, each side would need to find a way to redeploy the soldiers without giving up the territory won during the last 3 years. When Duncan had initially heard of the ceasefire, it had made a lot of sense. Yet, the more he thought about it, the more complicated it became. If we do implement a ceasefire, there'll be many questions, Williams said. None more so from the media. They will dig deep to find the truth. Sooner or later, everyone will find out about the presence of the Vazat aliens. Duncan agreed. There was no way to stop that eventuality from occurring. Chapter 2, Interrogation Room, United Alliance 1. Sergeant Monroe stood looking through the window into the interrogation room. Once he had returned to the base after his traveling with General Duncan, Monroe had expected Captain Urrea to permit him to return to his duties. He would be the first to admit the trip with the general had been exciting. Although they had been hunted by an alien vessel, it had left Monroe wanting more. When Monroe had enlisted, his parents had been fearful for him. He was the first in his family line to serve in the military. To Monroe, it was the highest honor, and he had been full of pride when he had been selected. The recent trip and how he managed himself only proved that he was meant to be a part of the United Alliance. But the most unexpected thing then happened. The general needed to travel to the United Alliance where he and the general were supposed to have initially visited. Instead, this time the general had ordered Captain Urrea to join him. For that to happen, Captain Urrea had gotten permission for him to interrogate Mr. Mullins. The second Captain Urrea had said it, Monroe's jaw had dropped. He never thought Captain Urrea would assign the delicate task to him. Again, he felt proud that the captain had so much faith in him. Monroe was pulled from his thoughts by a sound behind him. He turned and a soldier walked in. "Sir, we are ready for you to start the interrogation." Monroe nodded, took one last glance through the window at Mr. Mullins before turning and leaving the room. He took a deep breath as the soldier opened the door to the interrogation room. Monroe stepped inside and acknowledged the soldier standing behind Mr. Mullins, who was asleep. During the last few minutes, Monroe had read and reread the file on Mr. Mullins. He couldn't believe this seemingly innocent man had been working with the Vazat aliens. It was unthinkable. How could such a man betray humanity? It made no sense at all. But all the evidence pointed to the fact that Mr. Mullins was a traitor. Monroe approached the table and tapped his hand on it. Mr. Mullins groaned and woke up. The sound of his shackles rang throughout the cold room. Monroe pulled the chair out and sat down. He eyed Mr. Mullins. The man looked visibly tired, but Monroe didn't care. Although this was his first interrogation, he intended to do it properly. Captain Urrea had entrusted him with the task. Monroe still didn't know why and probably would never know. Maybe Captain Urrea saw something in him. No matter what, Monroe wasn't going to disappoint his captain. A mischievous smile crawled over Mr. Mullins' face. "Is this the best the military can send here? Aren't you a bit young to be interrogating me, kid?" Monroe didn't hesitate. In fact, he had been warned by Captain Urrea that Mr. Mullins might use his age and appearance against him. Monroe leaned forward and slapped the man hard on his face. "What the heck?" Mr. Mullins began. Monroe slapped him hard again. Then he sat back down. "You'll show some respect to me, or—" Mr. Mullins growled. "Or what? Are you going to call your mother here?" "Private, hand me your small arms weapon now," Monroe ordered. The soldier behind Mr. Mullins hesitated, but then pulled out his weapon and passed it to Monroe. Mr. Mullins eyed him. "What do you think you're doing? Do you even know how to use that weapon? It isn't a toy, you know." Monroe inspected the weapon and then aimed it at Mr. Mullins right between his eyes. "I'm preparing to kill a traitor." A slight fear swept Mr. Mullins' expression. "You can't." "Can't what?" Monroe hollered. "Maybe I can't kill you here, but I sure as heck can leave you with one functional arm, right?" Monroe shifted his weapon towards Mr. Mullins' right arm. "You have no right. You're resisting my questions." "We haven't even started the interrogation." "Is that what you think?" Monroe scowled as he began shifting his weapon from Mr. Mullins' right arm to the left one. "Which arm?" Huh? Which arm do you want to save? Monroe asked in a sarcastic tone. Choose your next words carefully, because you'll only have one arm left to live life with. Mr. Mullen's shoulders slumped and he leaned back in his chair. Okay, I'll cooperate. What do you want to know? Monroe kept a neutral expression. He didn't want to show Mr. Mullins that he was excited. That would not help the interrogation. He remained silent, letting Mr. Mullins sweat it out for another minute or so. Monroe also didn't pull away his weapon. He watched the man who had tried to bully him. Captain Arya had warned Monroe that Mr. Mullins would be a hard individual to crack. Nonetheless, Monroe was glad some headway had been made. To be honest, Monroe's heart had been pounding ever since he had first slapped the man. Are we going to start or what? Mr. Mullins asked in a nervous tone. Monroe pulled the weapon away from Mr. Mullins' face and passed it back to the soldier. We can begin. Chapter 3, Helipod, Eastern Plains. Captain Arya looked at General Duncan as he sat beside her on the helipod. After Arya and the rest had been dismissed from the meeting room, she had stood outside the building looking around at the carnage. Eventually, she volunteered to help the United Alliance soldiers. It was better than just waiting around for Duncan to finish his talk with Captain Williams. Arya sensed there was something more between Duncan and Williams than just a talk between two leaders from opposing factions. Duncan had been unable to hold back his surprise when they had stepped into the meeting room. It was obvious Duncan had recognized Captain Williams. Maybe the two had fought each other years ago. That was a possibility. Williams looked to be around the same age as Duncan. Once Duncan had emerged from the building, Arya had excused herself from helping the United Alliance soldiers and walked over to him. Duncan hadn't said much except that it was time to head back to their base. Arya had accepted it. Duncan turned to her. Captain, I'm sure you're wondering what's going on. Yes, sir. Duncan lowered his voice. I was given orders to propose a ceasefire with coalition forces. Arya was stunned by the revelation, but she managed to recover quickly. She should have expected something like this. After all, it wasn't every day that a United Alliance general visited a coalition forces captain. However, with the emergence of the Vazat alien species, they were all working under unusual circumstances. You don't seem too shocked, Duncan said. It does make sense considering the situation we're all in. We need to work together to fight the Vazat aliens. But do you think the coalition forces will accept a ceasefire deal? We must wait and see. Captain Williams will take our proposal back to his commanding officer, who will probably bring it to their council. I expect them to study our proposal carefully. From what I heard from his Lieutenant Kane, the Vazat aliens killed a fair number of their own soldiers too. Duncan nodded. Any update from Monroe? Not yet, sir. Arya checked her device. By now, Sergeant Monroe would be in the middle of the interrogation of Mr. Mullins. When General Duncan had suggested sending in Monroe to conduct the interrogation, Arya hesitated. Although she knew Monroe could handle it, he was still a bit inexperienced. However, she felt the general probably had his reasons for his decision. In the end, Arya had tried her best to advise Monroe on what to expect and how to handle the interrogation. I hope he can break Mr. Mullins down, Duncan muttered. Arya agreed. Mr. Mullins was key to finding out more about the Vazat aliens. He was also the only lead they had. Ever since the Vazat had disappeared from their sight, there had been no new sightings. I know he's hiding more information on the Vazat aliens, Duncan admitted. We just need to get him to talk. It was not going to be easy. Mr. Mullins' apparent hatred for the factions seemed to be a key motivator behind his actions. Despite that, there were still many gaps in the connection between Mr. Mullins and the Vazat aliens. Chapter 4, Hangar Bay, United Alliance 1. Senior Combat Engineer Taylor examined the alien vessel's hull. When he had been given the orders by Captain Arya, he had thought he had heard wrongly. But the captain had repeated his orders to study the internals of the alien vessel and determine what they could learn from it. Captain Arya had briefed him on the Vazat alien species and the United Alliance's encounters with them. Taylor was still trying to process the fact that aliens from out there in the galaxy were on Earth. His fingers grazed the vessel's hull. It was so smooth and clear evidence that they weren't alone in the galaxy. Nonetheless, Taylor appreciated the first opportunity to examine an alien vessel. He was probably doing something that most engineers could only dream of. A man approached him. "Private Santiago?" Taylor asked. "Yes, sir. Reporting here to assist you in the examination of the alien vessel." Santiago's eyes were filled with excitement. Nonetheless, Taylor was glad the man was here. Captain Arya had informed Taylor that Santiago would assist in the deciphering of the symbols within the alien vessel. Studying an alien vessel was already far beyond Taylor's capabilities. Taylor then motioned to Santiago and they walked around to the rear of the vessel and stepped inside of it. A few hours later, Taylor wiped the sweat off his brow. They were seated on the floor in front of the cockpit console studying it. The work was going painstakingly slow, much slower than he had anticipated. Trying to decipher the alien symbols was taking its toll on him. Yet, Santiago hadn't seemed defeated. Rather, the man was more excited than ever. Santiago seemed to take his own sweet time with each symbol, which forced Taylor to restrain himself. Then, Santiago stopped moving. "What is it?" Taylor asked. Santiago motioned him to remain quiet. The man then began to study one section of the cockpit. Taylor watched as Santiago leaned closer to that section. Something had apparently spooked the soldier. That was the only thing Taylor could conclude. Santiago then pulled out a device and placed it against that section of the cockpit. After a while, he leaned back and nudged Taylor to get up and walk back down the corridor. Taylor stood and headed back down the corridor. Midway through, Santiago touched his shoulder and lowered his voice. "I think the aliens can see and hear what we're doing in their vessel." Taylor's jaw dropped. "What?" "Keep your voice down," Santiago warned. Taylor frowned. "Are you sure of their surveillance?" "My device picked up a signal going out." "Can we jam it?" "That was my thinking too, but I think we need to check in with Captain Arya before we do it." Taylor agreed. He was stunned to realize that the alien vessel was sending out a signal from this location. The base's sensors should have picked it up the moment the vessel was brought here. But that hadn't happened. It was a serious lapse that compromised the security of the base. "Do you think the aliens know we detected their signal?" Taylor asked. "I don't know." "It's time I alert my commanding officer," Taylor said, walking down the corridor. "We better leave this vessel for now." If there was a signal going out from here, there was no telling what else was inside the vessel. There could even be hidden cameras. They would need to do comprehensive security scans of the entire vessel. Chapter 5: Interrogation Room, United Alliance 1. Sergeant Monroe began tapping his feet. "What are you not telling us, Mr. Mullins? I told you the Vazat aliens contacted me out of the blue." "I don't believe you." "What part don't you believe?" Mr. Mullins asked. Over the last 15 minutes, the man had explained in detail how he had run into a figure in his town and that figure had convinced him to work with them. According to Mr. Mullins, he had feared the Vazat aliens but had decided to work with them. Something was off with that explanation. Monroe couldn't put a finger on it, but he knew there was more that Mr. Mullins was keeping to himself. "If you don't tell me the truth, I'll be forced to." Monroe got the soldier to pass him the weapon again. Monroe looked at it before pointing it at Mr. Mullins. "You can't kill me." "Who said anything about killing you?" Monroe threatened. Fear again swept Mr. Mullins' expression. "I've told you everything." Monroe raised his voice. "No, you haven't." Mr. Mullins folded his arms and stared at him. "Tell me again why they picked you." "I told you already. They were looking for someone who had a grudge against the factions." Monroe leaned forward. "How did the aliens know of your grudge against the factions?" Mr. Mullins shrugged. Maybe they were observing me. Anyway, it wasn't as if I was keeping my frustration with the ongoing conflict a secret. Anyone who knew me would be able to tell you that. Monroe continued to press the man. Why you? I don't know. Look, I told you everything I know. Monroe kept shifting the weapon from the left to the right side. His gut told him there was more. Then something clicked in his mind. He was still wrestling with thoughts of why Mr. Mullins would willingly help the Vazat aliens. Even if he hated the factions and the war, there were other ways to do things, not like this. The aliens have something on you, don't they? Mr. Mullins opened and closed his mouth without a word. That was the only confirmation Monroe needed. Tell me, what do they have on you? Nothing. You're lying to me. Mr. Mullins raised his hands onto the table, his shackles clanging together. Just give me a break, man. I helped the aliens. You caught me. Just put me in prison and forget about me. I'm not going to fight with you in court over this. Huh? Monroe said. He was taken aback with the sudden change of Mr. Mullins' countenance. It only further confirmed that the aliens were blackmailing him. What do they have on you? Monroe repeated. Mr. Mullins heaved a loud sigh. They're holding my boy. What? They kidnapped my boy Benjamin and showed me a video of him, Mr. Mullins said. I don't get it. When the Vazat figure first approached me, I refused to help him, Mr. Mullins replied. You may not believe it, but it's the truth. I didn't want to be part of anything they were planning. I mean, these were aliens. At first, I didn't know they were aliens because they always came to me wearing a hood and a robe. I didn't think much about it. I just thought they were part of some gang. I pleaded with them to release my son, but they refused to. How old is he? Monroe asked softly. 20 years, Mr. Mullins replied. He had moved out of my home and was on his own renting a place. I also don't know how the aliens figured out I had a son and the location of his home. Monroe grimaced. The Vazat aliens had kept individuals under surveillance for getting their work done. The aliens must have realized they would need someone to transport the comms tower equipment. Human beings had been their best bet. Monroe also doubted Mr. Mullins was the only human that the Vazat aliens had been watching. They must have had a range of individuals. However, once they found out about his son, they knew they could use his son as leverage. How did you know they were aliens? Monroe asked. I followed the figure once and then I saw a bright light emanating from it, and then it disappeared, Mr. Mullins said with a sigh. It raised a red alert in my mind. Eventually I confronted the figure and it told me the truth about being from the galaxy. Even after the Vazat alien told me the truth, I still pleaded with the alien to release my son. But it refused to do that. It said I had to do their bidding. If I did, Benjamin would be safe. I had no choice. I really had no choice. Mr. Mullins lowered his head and began to weep. Monroe suppressed a sigh. He directed the soldier to unshackle the man. There was no need to keep him in restraints. The atmosphere in the room had changed like something Monroe would have never imagined. How long has your son been kept a prisoner? Monroe asked. Mr. Mullins twisted his arms once he was free of the shackles. Maybe 1 week? I don't know. Benjamin doesn't normally meet up with me. It could be longer than that. Monroe frowned. Do you know where he's being held? Mr. Mullins shook his head in despair. There's one more thing you need to know. Monroe looked at the completely defeated man and felt for him. I got the impression that there's an alien base somewhere on this continent. Monroe's eyes widened at the revelation. On this continent? Mr. Mullins nodded. Chapter 6, Captain's Office, Camp Delta 2. Captain Williams sat back on his chair mulling over the ceasefire proposal his brother had offered. It was the last thing he had expected. The United Alliance had experienced a much greater devastation from the Vazat alien species, which probably had led them to drafting a ceasefire proposal. Even then, Williams had expected his brother to bring up the past in their short meeting. But Duncan hadn't broached the topic, which was a good thing. There was no time to dwell in the past. A buzz on the console pulled Williams back to reality. It was General Stiles. Williams pressed on the console and an image of the general appeared. "Captain, I'm glad you made it back alive from your hunt," Stiles muttered. Williams swallowed hard. The general's tone alluded to something. Williams could sense that the man wasn't happy about his actions. "I read the report you submitted on going after the alien," Stiles admitted. Williams offered a nod. "You did a reckless thing by going on the hunt without reinforcements," Stiles scowled. Williams remained silent. That was the best course of action. He didn't want to justify his decision. At that time, it seemed reasonable. This was the first time he had encountered the wrath of General Stiles. He had heard from his other captains to avoid such situations, but he still felt he had done the right thing. "Did you know that you could have gotten killed like Captain Gainesville from the United Alliance base?" Williams had no choice but to respond, "Yes, sir. Your report says Lieutenant Kane asked you repeatedly to bring in reinforcements, but you rejected the suggestion." "Yes, sir. I felt it was too risky to bring my men and women, especially after the losses we had suffered on the base. They weren't ready." "Isn't it your job to make them combat ready?" The sarcasm in the general's tone made Williams clench his fist. "Captain, I don't want to hear of such things ever again. You must keep me informed of any future hunts. I can't afford to lose a captain. Is that clear?" "Crystal." "Let's move on then," Stiles scoffed. "I reviewed the ceasefire proposals from the United Alliance. I must say I'm intrigued by it. I also did share it with the Coalition Forces Council, and they share my sentiments." Williams struggled not to show his impatience. Why couldn't the general just tell him their decision? "The Coalition Forces Council accepts the ceasefire proposal," Stiles admitted with a smile. Williams struggled to remain neutral. He hadn't been certain which way the general and the council might head. Nothing was guaranteed even in these precarious times. Ever since the conflict with the United Alliance had broken out, General Stiles had been adamant on winning the war. The general had been fixated on it no matter the cost. Williams always suspected there was a greater reason for Stiles' disdain for the United Alliance, and it went beyond the call of duty. "I know you might be shocked by my decision, but I also agree with the Council," Stiles announced. "The presence of the alien species introduces a new unknown variable to an already complicated situation. The Council was unanimous that the Vazat alien threat had to be neutralized. That took priority over everything else, even if it means working together with our enemy." There it was again. Stiles' hatred for the United Alliance had no place to hide. "Once that has been accomplished, we can discuss with the coalition forces on the path forward," Stiles continued. "Even as we speak, our council had sent forth its intentions to the United Alliance Council." Williams offered a single nod. He was just relieved that he didn't have to talk to his brother again, at least not for now. Nonetheless, a ceasefire would be good news for all concerned. It would provide temporary relief for both sides. Williams surprised himself by even entertaining such a thought. But that would also mean they would need to focus all their attention on the Vazat alien threat. "How's the morale on the ground?" Stiles asked. "It's improving. You need to settle the sentiment on the ground. Although your base isn't on the front lines, the aliens have chosen to attack it. So we need the men and women to be combat ready. Get it done. I don't want to hear of any more casualties or excuses from your base." "Yes, sir." Williams didn't want to get a tarnish on his record for not managing his base. His base was the rare one where a general didn't directly oversee it. Instead, General Stiles had given him the authority to manage the base. Williams refused to let the general down. Chapter 7, Meeting Room, United Alliance 1. Duncan sat and looked at Sergeant Monroe opposite him. "Are you sure Mr. Mullins is telling us the truth?" The moment Duncan had returned to his base, he had wanted to check in with Monroe on the status of the interrogation. He had hoped Captain Arria would have joined him, but she had been called away by an urgent matter on the alien vessel. At first, I was also skeptical about it, sir, but I believe it's true. Duncan offered a single nod. I'm glad you were able to extract the truth from him. He seemed like a hard nut to crack. Yes, he was. In the end, he was simply protecting his son. Duncan arched his eyebrows. What's the progress on that? I've already requested for the video footage along the road where the son lives to be pulled out and studied, Monroe replied. Duncan was impressed by Monroe. Arya had been correct in recommending the man. The man was proactive and displayed a shade of Arya's confidence. Duncan was always on the lookout for the next group of individuals to promote to captain. In a drawn-out conflict, it was necessary to ensure proper succession planning. He didn't want to be put in a corner where he was forced to promote people who weren't ready. Sometimes that happens by default in a war. Yet Duncan was trying his best to avoid it. The conflict with the coalition forces was taking its toll on his captains on the front lines. That was the horrific nature of war. There were no two ways to talk about it. Yet everyone who went to the front line had a heart to serve and fight for their beliefs. That was more than enough for Duncan. Was Mr. Mullins able to shed any light on the alien base, Duncan asked. Monroe shook his head. That's the part I'm still not sure of. Why? I mean, it's based on Mr. Mullins' impression. I did press him on it. The Vazat aliens never said it to him, but nor did he overhear it from them. He just felt that there was an alien base out there. Duncan frowned. Despite Monroe's doubts about Mr. Mullins' assertion of the existence of an alien base, Duncan knew better. Years of experience in the military had taught him to never dismiss the slightest of things. If someone said something without proof, they still needed to take it seriously. Duncan had painfully learned that lesson over the years, and he had lost good men and women in the process. Monroe was inexperienced and young. It was expected the officer would have doubts. If Duncan had been in his shoes, he probably would have voiced the same concerns. I understand, but we can't simply ignore it. And it does make sense that the aliens are hiding somewhere. Whether it's a base like this or not is another question. But the Vazat aliens are holed up somewhere. And if we can find this alien base, I think we'll also find Mr. Mullins' son. Monroe nodded. I also want you to investigate whether there have been other missing people reported in the surrounding towns, not only Springfield. Dismissed. Monroe stood and walked out of his room. Duncan leaned back heavily in his chair. His thoughts drifted back to his meeting with his brother. He had never expected to find him on the United Alliance base. But based on their limited yet awkward conversation, Williams was in the thick of the Vazat alien situation. It was just fate that the two of them were on military bases that the Vazat had targeted. That was the only thing Duncan could conclude. Despite that, it was good to see that his brother was well. Growing up, Duncan had been close with his brother. Yet over time, as they became teenagers, the two of them came to a fork in their lives and headed down two different roads. The death of their father had been the final nail in the coffin. Everything had boiled over after that point and pushed them apart forever. Never had Duncan imagined he would need to work with Williams again, but that was the reality he was facing now. He had heard from the United Alliance Council that the coalition forces had accepted the ceasefire proposal. The news had been relayed to him faster than he had anticipated. He had informed his comms officers to relay it down to the front lines. To be honest, it was good news. A break in the conflict would help both factions divert their resources to handling the Vazat threat. Ever since he had been hunted by the alien vessel, Duncan knew the Vazat were out to kill them. After 30 years, the aliens had emerged and were now causing havoc. But why now? That was something that still bothered him. He had asked Lucas to dig deeper into the 30-year timeline and get back to him. Chapter 8, Hangar Bay, United Alliance 1. Captain Arya cocked her head as she gazed at Private Santiago. She had been stunned to hear of a signal leaving the alien vessel. She was certain there had been no such thing when the vessel had been brought into the base. How long has this signal been active? Santiago shrugged, unable to tell. It may have been triggered once the Vazat realized we had taken control of one of their vessels. Area shared his sentiments. The Vazat aliens probably had a way to remotely activate the signal. Nevertheless, it caused a big headache for her. Should they keep the alien vessel on the base, or should they dispose of it? She wasn't sure. She made a mental note to check in with the general on it. "Do you think there are other scanners on board that have been activated?" Arya asked. "Taylor and I pulled some devices and began scanning the exterior of the vessel," Santiago replied. "So far, our scans have not revealed anything else except for that signal," Taylor added. Arya frowned. "I want this area cordoned off completely. Ensure no one goes near the vessel except for the two of you. If the signal had video footage, the Vazat aliens would have already seen you. There's nothing much we can do about that." A tinge of fear swept both men's expressions. "Do we continue with the examination of the vessel?" Taylor asked. "Give me a moment to check in on it with General Duncan," Arya said. She stepped aside and opened a private comms link with General Duncan. After she had explained to him the situation, she got his orders, closed the comms link, and returned to the two men. "I've spoken to General Duncan. His orders are to jam the signal. There's no need to worry about whether the Vazat aliens realize it or not. They know we have their vessel, but he doesn't want any more signals leaving that vessel." "Understood, Captain," Taylor nodded. "I'll jam the signal." "Based on your examination of the vessel, have you been able to find anything about the blinding light?" Arya asked. "Not yet," Taylor replied. "We'll keep our eyes open to any information on it. Is there anything else to look out for?" "Any maps would be useful," Arya commented. "Maps of other planets?" Taylor asked. "Maps that point to an alien base on Earth," Arya replied softly. Santiago whistled. "Keep that information to yourselves," Arya warned. The two men nodded and left her side. When General Duncan had informed her of the possibility of an alien base, she had also been left speechless. If there was an alien base, the implications would be profound. It would also mean that someone was helping the Vazat aliens protect the base. Unfortunately, that someone pointed to humans. The whole notion of humans working with the Vazat aliens was a bitter pill to swallow. But after her encounter with Mr. Mullins, nothing was off the table. Humanity always had a way of disappointing her. Chapter 9. Lucas' Home, Arcadia. Lucas took a sip of his coffee as he sat back down at his desk. It was good to be back home. His little adventure chasing his father's secrets about the Vazat had been exhilarating. Nonetheless, Lucas hated how his father continued to manipulate him, even after death and after all these years. If his father was watching him from above, he would be chuckling. After returning to his home, Glenn had suggested upping the security around the premises. Lucas had agreed with his VP. Now he had a security detail of 10 men and women stationed around the perimeter of his home. It may have sounded like overkill, but with the Vazat still lurking out there, it was necessary. The problem was that no one, including General Duncan, knew how many Vazat aliens were roaming about Earth. Was it a small group, or could there be hundreds or even thousands of them? Lucas hoped it was the former. Nonetheless, the extra security was reassuring. Lucas turned his gaze back to the message he had received from General Duncan. Duncan wanted him to find out more on the significance of the 30-year period. Lucas would be the first to admit that it was something that had been at the back of his mind. There was more to the 30-year period than he had so far uncovered. He had reached out to the Ment family lawyer to help him dig up any contracts or agreements his father may have signed 30 years ago. That was as good a place as any to start. His father was always meticulous around agreements, making sure every dot was accounted for. His father hated being taken advantage of by unscrupulous partners, even if he had worked with them for years. Many decades ago, before the Western continent had sunk into chaos, companies and partners valued each other and held to their commitments. At least that was what Lucas had heard from his father. It was all about the good old days. But once the factions had emerged across the continent, the level of distrust had perpetuated to an extreme. Companies had initially wanted to stay neutral. However, that had been a pipe dream. Every faction tried to lure big companies to their side. The factions perceived that the bigger companies that aligned with them, the more leverage they would have over the other factions in terms of trade. Lucas was shocked to see companies align with different factions. He couldn't understand why the companies would choose to do that because it ultimately affected their bottom line. Over time, the two bigger factions had realized the problem with the company's alignment. It was hurting their own people. An agreement had then been reached which allowed companies to sell across all factions. For once, Lucas felt the factions had come up with a viable solution that would benefit all. Time to get back to work. He began searching his company databases for any references to a 30-year-old agreement that his father signed. Then his comms buzzed. It was the Ment family lawyer, Grant. "Grant, I hope you got some good news for me," Lucas said. "Sir, I found something, but I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for," Grant replied. "Did you find the agreement?" "Not exactly. 30 years ago, your father opened a physical account at a storage facility." Lucas was puzzled. "I don't understand." "I have records that he deposited several documents in that account." Lucas leaned closer to the desk. "Are you implying one of those documents could be the agreement?" "It's a possibility." "Are you able to retrieve the documents?" "It can only be done by you, sir." "Those are your father's instructions." Lucas frowned. That sounded just like his father. Another way to force him to go somewhere. "Send me the location of the storage facility and I'll head over there right away." Chapter 10, Hangar Bay, United Alliance 1. Senior Combat Engineer Taylor stared at the cockpit console. He and Private Santiago had cordoned off the area around the alien vessel. Following that, they stepped back into the vessel with their scanning devices. It was necessary to do one last round of internal scans of the vessel before they began jamming the signal. They needed to be sure that the Vazat aliens hadn't left them any more surprises. Santiago turned to him. "How do you think the aliens activated the signal? I mean, do you think it happened once the vessel arrived here?" "I doubt it," Taylor countered. "It must have happened when the alien vessel was on transit to this base." Santiago kept pointing his device around the cargo bay of the alien vessel. "But once the vessel got here, no one noticed the signal going out, huh?" Taylor pressed his lips into a thin line. That was the major problem. Why didn't someone notice the signal heading out? The officers at the operations center should have picked it up, but they hadn't. Taylor would be the first to admit that it was worrisome. "I think our knowledge of the Vazat alien species' capabilities is still very limited. We need to find out more about them, which is why we are here." As they walked further down the corridor, they checked the compartments one by one. Nothing was discovered in any of the compartments. Then they slowly crept forward along the corridor. Taylor raised his hand. "What is it?" Santiago asked. Taylor showed him his device. "I'm getting some kind of static on my device." "Wait a minute, I'm getting it too. Something's wrong here." Santiago tilted his head to one side. "Another signal?" "I don't think so." Taylor studied the static coming on his device. It was too random to be just that. "Do you notice there's a pattern?" "I see it too. Let me make a note of it." Santiago then scribbled down something on this device. He then showed it to Taylor. "It's a message from someone." Taylor's eyes widened. Santiago signaled to him and they finished scanning the interior and then left the vessel. Outside, Taylor looked at him. "What does the message say?" "I don't need to decrypt it," Santiago said with a smile before showing Taylor his device. "I want to help you. Look for me near the river in the valley." "What does it mean?" Santiago asked. "I'll need to update Captain Area about it," Taylor replied. "But I suspect whoever sent this is talking about the location of the alien base." Chapter 11, Operation Center, Vazat Base. Captain Kofia deleted the transmission she had just sent to the Vazat vessel that the humans had stolen from her species. She had been able to find a way to piggyback on the signal leaving the vessel without being detected. She could only hope that the humans would find her transmission. If they didn't, there was nothing else she could do. She had taken the greatest risk in sending the transmission right in front of her own kind. Kofia turned to her lieutenant. Shoten, anything on the sensors? Nothing, Captain. Kofia stared out the window into the valley. The snow-capped mountains were a wonderful sight to behold. Beside the Vazat base, a large river meandered through the valley. Such natural wonders didn't exist on her home planet. In fact, her home planet was barren except for the cities where life thrived. But on Earth, as humans like to call their planet, there were so many natural wonders. When Kofia arrived here years ago, she had been astonished by the planet. She had felt it was like utopia. However, most of her other kind hadn't fallen for the planet. Instead, their focus had been on the mission, a mission that had started many decades ago. With the 30-year Ment Treaty over, her kind was now ready to complete their original mission. However, Kofia had over time begun entertaining the wrong thoughts. Some of these thoughts would have gotten her killed, but she had kept them to herself. Humanity didn't deserve what was coming to them. She had found the humans they worked with on this base different. Although they all harbored a deep resentment for the other humans beyond this valley, they wanted humanity to improve itself. Captain Suti, who was the leader of the Vazat species at the base, had been able to convince enough humans of it. Kofia would be the first to admit that Suti was cunning. Nonetheless, all the humans had accepted Suti's arguments. At first, Kofia hadn't thought much about it. Over time, she had realized that Suti was a master at deception. Suti had been able to pull on the string of emotions in each individual human and gotten them to his side. Every one of the humans who worked alongside them were pacifists, who hated the constant wars between the human factions. These humans wanted a day when there was peace across the continent and subsequently over the planet. To be honest, these humans were naive. Peace was elusive. The Vazat species had fought many wars around their homeworld. A sound reached her. Kofia turned as a female human walked in and passed a folder to Lieutenant Shoten. The human nodded and left the operation center. The naiveness of humanity had impacted Kofia. She didn't believe her own species needed to do what was necessary to humanity. That single thought had begun a change within Kofia like nothing else. And that had been one of the key reasons for sending that transmission to humans. She only hoped they had received it. Everything hinged on it. If the humans could find the Vazat base, Kofia would be able to help them change the tides in their favor before it was too late. Then she received a message from Captain Suti. Kofia studied the message carefully, reading the details. A new mission to one of the human towns. Kofia suppressed a sigh. Chapter 12. Storage Facility Anderson. Lucas brought the transport pod to a halt outside the parking lot of the storage facility. He stared out through the front screen. The parking lot was half empty. Two other transport pods pulled up and parked on either side of him. The security detail was on their toes. When he had told them that he would need to travel to Anderson, which was an hour away from his home, the security had scrambled to get ready. Despite the surprise announcement, the security guards were on the ball. It had only taken them 5 minutes before the convoy of transport pods had left his home. Lucas had even observed that several drones were flying overhead. However, he hadn't had a chance to see them. Moving around in a convoy increased the likelihood that people would notice them. It was so obvious as there weren't many convoys driving around the roads. Ever since the break-in to his home, Lucas was forced into this situation. His choices were limited. There was no other way for his security contingent to make it less obvious. The Vazat aliens had already proven they were ready to take out anyone they deemed necessary. He couldn't afford to take a risk. General Duncan had also said it was necessary. He had even offered to send a military unit to Lucas's home. Lucas had politely rejected the offer. Having a military unit around his home would be too much. Although his property was secluded with no neighbors, he still didn't want more reasons for curious onlookers to stop by. When Lucas had heard of the death and destruction at the United Alliance base beside Wiley Forest, he had been stunned. The Vazat aliens didn't seem to care about the loss of lives. What made it worse was that the Vazat aliens had staged it all to cover their work on the comms tower. The Vazat alien on the base had been like a sacrifice. If the Vazat alien had died, it wouldn't have cared, as long as its mission had been accomplished. Two men of the security detail approached his transport pod. One of them tapped on the side window. That was the signal. As per protocol, the security guards would do a quick surveillance of the surroundings before letting him step out of the transport pod. Again, it was a necessary thing that Lucas disliked. Lucas stepped out of his pod and closed the door. Sir, the front entrance is that way, one of the security men stated. All is clear out here. Lucas nodded and scanned the parking lot. Several more of his security guards were standing around a distance away. At least the security guards were well trained and not making it obvious. After everything that had happened, he had requested the best money could afford. He began walking towards the front door. His eyes scanned the vicinity looking for anything unusual. His senses were heightened ever since flying the alien vessel. Anderson was another town that dotted the eastern plains. It had some older buildings that looked quaint and were homage to a past when this continent had consisted of multiple nations. Lucas recalled the stories his father had told him of those days. He doubted anyone could have imagined the current state of the world. And it wasn't localized to the Western continent. Conflicts had also broken out throughout the world with nation pitted against nation. Governments had fallen and boundaries had been reimagined. The number of deaths that followed was so large that the media stopped even counting. And from those conflicts, new factions emerged, each with their own agenda and beliefs. The factions disrupted all trade and travel across the planet, plunging humanity into an age of despair. Collaboration amongst nations dissipated and a wave of distrust covered the planet. On a personal level, Lucas had a fascination with the factions on the Western continent. Every 6 months, the number of factions fluctuated. Prior to the emergence of the Vazat alien species, Lucas had been tracking the formation of factions. Just within the last 6 months, there had been 2 to 3 new smaller factions that had appeared on the Western continent. Reaching the front door with a bold sign on top of it with a red font, Lucas pulled on it and stepped into a large lobby. The cool air tickled him as he took in the scene before him. At the other end was a long marble counter with several service officers standing behind it. The wall behind the service officers was painted to highlight the benefits of using the storage facility. A queue of people was in the front of the large counter. Lucas eyed the queue. People of different age groups waited for their turn to be served by the next service officer. Sir, I'll get in line, the security guard started. Lucas interrupted him. That won't be necessary. I'll stand in the queue. Take a seat over there and keep your eyes open. Chapter 13, Meeting Room, United Alliance 1. Duncan stepped into the room and sat down opposite Captain Arya and Senior Combat Engineer Taylor. Arya had requested him to come down to discuss a discovery on the alien vessel. Arya's request had sounded urgent, which had pushed Duncan to meet them immediately. Duncan eyed the two of them. I assume you found something significant. Taylor hesitated. Sir, while I and Private Santiago were doing the internal scans of the alien vessel, we encountered an incoming transmission. Different from the outgoing signal? Duncan asked. Taylor nodded. Duncan leaned forward. You have my attention. We believe the incoming transmission was from someone linked to the alien vessel, Taylor said, as he passed the device to Duncan. Duncan took the device and glanced at the message and frowned. Do we know where it originated from? Although the message was short, it opened many questions, none of which Duncan thought they could answer. Not right now, at least. No, sir, Arya replied. I have someone trying to figure it out. Our best guess is that whoever sent it used the outgoing signal as a cover, Taylor reported. It's a pretty smart move because no one would think of it. Duncan understood the implication. The chances of finding the source solely based on the transmission was a long shot. Are you saying this came from the Vazat aliens? Duncan asked. That's our assumption, Arya said, especially since it appears that whoever sent this wants to help us. Duncan drummed his fingers on the table, having his own doubts about the purpose of the transmission. It could also be a trap. That's another thought we shared, Arya said, looking at Taylor. Duncan rubbed his chin. Was this a trap? Based on their recent encounters, the Vazat aliens were capable of it. They had, after all, created a lot of mayhem at the newly built United Alliance base just to cover their activities in Wiley Forest. Fortunately, William's proactiveness had prevented the Vazat aliens from establishing the comms tower. If not, Duncan didn't know where they would be right now. Most likely not in a good situation. His thoughts briefly then drifted to his brother and wondered what he was up to. Would he and his brother resume talking to each other? Based on the way their conversation had ended, Duncan wasn't sure. Despite that, this was the wrong time to think of his brother. But we should still assume it could be someone trying to reach out to us, Duncan commented, looking at Arya. Captain, what's your assessment? I think it may be genuine, Arya replied. He noted a quick reply from his captain, and her eyes were shining. If we go with the assumption that the transmission is genuine, what's our next step? Duncan asked. I have asked one of the men to find all valleys with a river going through on this continent, Arya said. I didn't expect any less, Duncan said with a smile. Go ahead and update me once we have a set of potential sites. Duncan couldn't even imagine how many such valleys may exist on the Western continent. But it was something they couldn't ignore, and hopefully the list wouldn't be too long. If that didn't turn out to be the case, it was possible for them to search for the short list of positions one by one. Yes, sir, Arya replied. Duncan then turned to Taylor. That'll be all, Taylor. Taylor got to his feet, acknowledged him, and left the room. Is there anything else, sir? Arya asked. It looks like this transmission triangulates with what Mr. Mullins shared with Monroe. Yes, it does. At least Mr. Mullins hadn't willingly joined the Vazat aliens. That itself was a comforting thought. Duncan didn't want to consider the alternative. I agree, sir. Duncan eyed his captain. But what? Sir, I can see that you have something on your mind. Arya paused for a long moment. The Vazat aliens have been intentionally targeting individuals. Whatever they are doing has been in the planning for a while. It wasn't random that they snatched Mr. Mullins' son. They must have been observing a host of us. Duncan offered a single nod. Have you heard anything from the front lines? I've heard the fighting has stopped. It's a good break for everyone. Duncan had to concur. However, he knew better than to put his hopes on the ceasefire bringing forth a longer peace. The Vazat aliens had forced the United Alliance and the coalition forces into a ceasefire. Once the Vazat alien threat was neutralized, there was nothing stopping the resumption of the conflict. Unfortunately, many parties had vested interest in continuing the war. Arya then pulled out her device and looked at it. Duncan observed her expression change. What is it? We got a lead from the video footage in front of Mr. Mullins' son's home, Arya announced. The last time he was seen was getting into a transport pod. Chapter 14, Neighborhood, Anderson. Captain Arya stepped out of a transport pod. She had brought along Sergeant Monroe to investigate the lead about Benjamin, Mr. Mullins' son. The partial license plate had matched to her owner in this town. So as to not make it obvious, she had parked her transport pod a few homes before the one they were investigating. Arya glanced around the empty road with homes on either side. Arya walked along the sidewalk with Monroe until she came to a stop. Her gaze turned to the single-level home in front of her. Is this the place? Monroe asked. According to our records. I don't see any transport in the driveway. Someone might still be home. Arya touched her weapon in the holster but kept it there. She didn't want a repeat of what had happened when they had approached Mr. Mullins' home. At the same time, they needed to be wary. What's his name again? Monroe asked. Mr. Griffith. Again, the databases showed nothing significant about Mr. Griffith. According to the records, the man was retired and didn't work any longer. Arya was also aware that those records may not have been up to date. Arya scanned the neighborhood again. It was quiet, nothing unusual. At this time, most people would be out at work and their children in school. Reaching the front door, Arya knocked on it. Monroe was off to one side with his weapon drawn out. A male voice boomed from inside. Coming. The door opened and a middle-aged man in shorts and a t-shirt stared at her. Hello, how may I help you? Are you Mr. Griffith? Area asked. Mr. Griffith smiled. That's me. Did I run a red light or something? Area realized that the man had wrongly recognized him as belonging to the local police. Mr. Griffith probably didn't know the difference, but his misunderstanding was typical, since it was rare for the military to make house calls. We just wanted to ask you about your transport pod, Area said. Did you find it? Mr. Griffin asked. Area cocked her head. What do you mean? Someone stole my transport pod a few weeks ago, but I hadn't had time to report it in. Area frowned. You should have reported it in. Mr. Griffith's lips let out a long sigh. That was my mistake. But ever since that day, I've been busy with some personal matters. I guess it slipped my mind. Area looked up and down the man. Mr. Griffith wasn't that old. How could he have forgotten to report his stolen transport pod? Anyway, that old transport pod was coming apart, Mr. Griffith said. Whoever stole it was probably doing me a big favor. I had been planning on replacing it. Area felt it. She exchanged a glance with Monroe, who nodded. Something was wrong here. For someone who had lost a transport pod, Mr. Griffith was acting too calm. People would at least show a bit of emotion when something had been stolen. Unfortunately, transport pods being stolen weren't unheard of. Area had heard crime had been on the rise in the neighboring towns. The local media linked it to the grinding war between the factions. However, no proof had been shown of such a link. Despite that, Area had to admit that crime was on the rise. I have one more question for you, Area said. Go ahead, Mr. Griffith said, but then his eyes darted to the left. Area noticed a sudden movement in his eyes. She managed to recover herself. Have you noticed any robed figures around your home? What kind of figures are you talking about? Mr. Griffith asked, his eyes again darting to the left. This is a busy neighborhood and there's a lot of people who come and go. I'm talking about figures who aren't supposed to be here, Area explained. How long have you lived here? I've been here since before the factions split our continent, Mr. Griffith replied. This time his gaze lingered on her. Whatever he had been doing with his eyes, he wasn't doing it any longer. I see, Area said. Then you would know if you saw something unusual. Of course I would, Mr. Griffith said. Now, if that's all, I need to get back to my cooking. I got something on the stove. Area nodded. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Please remember to report in your stolen transport pod. We do want to help people get back their stolen items. I understand, Mr. Griffith said and closed the door. Area turned. Monroe holstered his weapon and they walked away from Mr. Griffith's home. Reaching the sidewalk, they slowly began to walk back to the transport pod. He's hiding something, Monroe admitted. You picked up on it too, huh? Monroe nodded, but the man was calm. Unlike Mr. Mullins, he spoke as if everything was okay. Area pondered on Monroe's words. She was certain something wasn't right with her brief encounter with Mr. Griffith. And what was that with his eyes? Monroe asked. I think there's someone else inside his home. Monroe jerked his head back. Are you sure? The young soldier still had a long way to go in picking up the irregularities and connecting the dots. I am. Even though Mr. Griffith projected a calm demeanor, he was under duress. That's why his eyes moved a bit. The man was intelligent enough not to do it at the start. That would have tipped off whoever was inside the home. He spoke calmly with me and then towards the end gave me the signal. Reaching the transport pod, Area opened the door and jumped inside. Monroe also stepped in and strapped himself in. Why are we leaving then? Area smirked. Who said we are leaving? She pressed on the console and the engine started up. Then she pulled out and drove down the road and past Mr. Griffith's home. At the end of the road, she turned left and kept driving. Then she brought the transport pod to a halt and parked it again. I wanted whoever was inside Mr. Griffith's home to see us leave. That should help Mr. Griffith. Come on, it's time we find out who's really inside that home. Area stepped out of the transport pod and sent a message to General Duncan, updating him of the status of the investigation. Someone or something was inside Mr. Griffith's home, and Area intended to find out who that was. Chapter 15, General's Office, United Alliance 1. General Duncan leaned back on his chair. He was still mulling over how daring the Vazat aliens had become in kidnapping the children of people, just so that they could force the humans to do their work. The Vazat aliens didn't seem to care about people finding out about them. It implied there was a sense of urgency for the Vazat aliens to do whatever they wanted to do. Although they had been able to stop the establishment of the comms tower by the Vazat aliens, Duncan knew that would not stop them. They would double their efforts to try and contact their own species in the galaxy. As he continued to ponder on it, the phone buzzed. Duncan studied the incoming call. It was an unknown number. He frowned because he never got such calls. How had the caller gotten through? It didn't matter. He picked up the phone. Hello? General Duncan, please, a male voice said. You're speaking to him. Who is this and how did you get this number? General, I got your number through a mutual friend of Lucas Ment, the voice said. Who is this? Duncan repeated. My name's Callum, the voice replied. I used to work with Eddie on the project, if you know what I mean. Duncan straightened himself in his chair. Eddie Booth? Yes, sir. You said you used to work with him. I got myself transferred out after Eddie's death. Duncan narrowed his eyes. Why are you calling me today? I have some information that might be of use to you, sir, Callum said. You may have heard that Eddie used some proprietary technology. Yes, what about it? I can't tell you anything over the phone. It's too dangerous. Duncan furrowed his brows. What do you mean? It was obvious Callum was speaking under a lot of pressure. Are you still working in MXT-4? Duncan asked. I transferred to a different military installation, Callum replied. I didn't want to stay there ever since Eddie died. Why don't we meet up somewhere to talk more, Duncan proposed. I don't know. Duncan didn't want to give up on the opportunity. Look, I'm grateful for you reaching out to me. It's quite dangerous for me to even call you, but you still took the chance. There was a stretch of silence. For a second, Duncan thought that Callum had dropped the call, but the man hadn't. I can meet you, Callum announced. Send me a position and I'll be there soon, Duncan said. Callum then gave him a location which he wasn't familiar with. Despite that, Duncan promised the man he would be there within the hour. With that, Duncan ended the call. He got to his feet, checked on the device again for the position, and walked out of his office. Chapter 16, Mr. Griffith's home, Anderson. Captain Kofia emerged from the corridor in Mr. Griffith's home. Juram, her junior officer, was still standing at the door beside Mr. Griffith. She had overheard the entire conversation between Mr. Griffith and the humans. When Captain Stuti had assigned Kofia and Juram to check in on Mr. Griffith, she had been curious. Stuti had mentioned that she wanted to ensure Mr. Griffith kept to the terms of their agreement. Kofia had accepted it and ventured out of the valley. It was always risky leaving the valley, but these days required it. If not, they wouldn't be able to fulfill the plans after 30 years. Kofia had traveled here on a smaller Vazat vessel and landed it in the forest behind this neighborhood. Fortunately, all the Vazat vessels had the ability to avoid the censors of the factions. That had been one of the ways they had remained hidden for so many years. Mr. Griffith, you did the right thing just now, Kofia said. Mr. Griffith grunted. In fact, his cover story had been a solid one. Even Stuti wouldn't have been able to come up with such a one. Whenever they forced one of the humans to work for them, Stuti ensured the humans themselves would create a story. It was more effective that way since humans understood their own kind the best. Although the Vazat species over the years had studied humans from a distance, it was still hard to understand all their nuances. Have they gone? Kofia asked. Yes, Juram replied. I saw their transport pod go down the road and turn. They were military officers. Kofia was taken aback by that revelation. Did they say so? Negative, Juram replied. But I recognized their uniforms. They are from the nearby base. Kofia frowned. How did they know to come here? She was annoyed that the military had been able to find Mr. Griffith, and find him quickly. They must have left a piece of evidence that led the military here. Probably a partial image of Mr. Griffith's transport pod. Kofia knew her species was becoming sloppy. This was unlike the Vazat species. They had remained undercover on this planet for over 30 years. Not a single human being had suspected anything. But now, Things were slowly starting to unravel. It made Kofia nervous. Suti was also concerned, but not as much as Kofia. Suti remained focused on the mission. Nothing would stop him from achieving it. Because you used my transport pod to snatch that kid, Mr. Griffith scowled. Juram pressed his weapon at the man. I would be careful in your choice of words, human. Mr. Griffith raised his hands and took a step back. Kofia stepped in between them and stared at her junior officer. Stand back. Juram's eyes widened, but he obeyed and took a step back. The last thing Kofia needed now was for a fight to break out between her junior officer and the human. It was too dangerous now, especially after the military had just left the vicinity. Kofia then turned to the human. You did well in speaking to them and explaining about the missing transport pod. What do you want with me? Mr. Griffith demanded. I've done everything you wanted. Kofia glanced at him, which is good. You don't want anything bad happening to your daughter, right? Mr. Griffith's shoulders slumped. Is Kathy safe? Your daughter is safe, Kofia assured the man. When Captain Suti had initially proposed the plan of blackmailing humans by kidnapping their family, Kofia had been a bit stunned. However, at the meeting she had remained neutral and nodded with the rest. Kofia would be the first to admit that Suti knew how to get to the humans. It probably had to do with years of waiting and observing humans. Suti had never been agreeable to the men treaty established 30 years ago. Suti found it disgusting that Tudor men had cornered the Vazat and forced the treaty on them. Nonetheless, that was the past. It was time to move on from it. Because of all the waiting, Captain Suti had doubled his efforts in trying to fulfill the original mission of the Vazat. Kofia knew Suti would not stop until he achieved it. Suti cared little for the human species, unlike her. Kidnapping human children was something Kofia couldn't accept. It was outside the realm of her beliefs. To Suti, it was just a means to an end. Even the human pacifists working with them had been agreeable to Suti's plan. Hate seemed to have gotten a stronghold in each of the human pacifists. Humanity wasn't that different from the Vazat species. Both species seemed to thrive on hate. It was unfortunate. There had been a time when the Vazat species had lived in peace with its neighbors, but that was centuries ago, before Kofia's time. Show me, Mr. Griffith asked. Juram glared at him. Kofia raised her hand and pulled out a device. She then clicked on it a few times. Then a holographic image appeared of Kathy, Mr. Griffith's 21-year-old daughter, seated in a prison cell. This is a live image, Kofia admitted. Mr. Griffith's facial expression changed as his gaze fell upon his daughter. The pain in his face was so obvious. Kofia caught a sideways glance of Juram snickering at the man. Kofia motioned to her junior officer to remain quiet. Captain Suti had been clear on the purpose of this visit. To ensure Mr. Griffith didn't do anything that would reveal the intentions of the Vazat species. Even then, the timing of the visit by the military was uncanny. Kofia hadn't expected it. In fact, she had expected to visit Mr. Griffith and already be on her way back. But the arrival of the military at the front door had caught her off guard. Could she trust to leave Mr. Griffith alone? Would he go to the authorities? There was one thing Kofia had clearly learned from observing humans. They were weak. They could be broken down. That was the risk of working with humans. Are you taking care of her? Mr. Griffith asked in a hoarse voice. She'll be taken care of as long as you do what we say, Kofia said in a stern voice. Is that clear? She then shut the holographic projection. Mr. Griffith nodded. What else do you want from me? I've already helped you get that man. We aren't finished with you, Kofia said. Our visit today was to check on you. We'll be back with further instructions. Juram turned to her. What about the military? They might return to talk to him. Kofia had no doubt the military would eventually return to this home. Mr. Griffith's story of his transport pod being stolen would only keep them at bay for a while. Mr. Griffith, please go to the room, Kofia ordered. Why? Mr. Griffith asked. Just do it, Juram threatened. Mr. Griffith retreated down the corridor and stepped into his room. Juram walked up to Kofia. Why didn't you let me hit him? We are to follow Captain Suti's orders. Do you want me to tell him that we injured the human? Then we won't be able to use him anymore. Juram lowered his voice. I understand, Captain. I was just angry when the military showed up. So was I. We must be careful from this point onwards. But with his daughter with us, I doubt Mr. Griffith will do anything stupid. He wouldn't want to risk hurting his daughter. He'll never see his daughter alive again, Joram snickered. Kofian nodded. After each kidnapping, Stuti's plan was never to return the human beings to their parents. The humans knew of the alien base and would reveal it to the military. That was something Stuti could never let happen. Being kidnapped was a death sentence for each of the human children. That was another reason Kofia found the entire plan sickening. Going down to this level was not something the Vazat species usually did. Fighting enemies on the battlefield was different. Kofia accepted the casualties as part of war. Kidnapping was a cowardly way to force the humans to do their will. Yet, Kofia knew she was possibly the only one of her kind who held that opinion, which was another reason she had sent that secret transmission to the humans on the United Alliance base. Any update on Turim? Kofia asked. Turim was another junior officer who had traveled with her in the vessel. He had been assigned another mission by Captain Stuti. During the trip over, Turim had been quiet about the details of his mission, and Kofia had chosen not to try and get it out of him. Once she had landed their vessel, Turim had headed out on his own without another word. Kofia hoped that Turim wouldn't get into any trouble. Nonetheless, she had informed Turim to be back within a few hours. She didn't want to stay back because of him. Having the three of them in a single human town was already too much, at least in her opinion. Nothing yet, Joram said. Chapter 17, Coffee Shop Anderson. Captain Williams sipped on his coffee. Lieutenant Kane sat opposite him in the booth with his coffee. They had driven out to Anderson because Kane had heard from one of his men of a sighting of a figure in a robe walking about the town. Kane had made an immediate connection to the Vazat alien and informed Williams. It had been a longer than expected drive because Anderson was located on the edge of the eastern plains. Several hours later, they arrived at this coffee shop. Williams hadn't wanted to bring any more men with him. He didn't want to tip off the Vazat alien if it was still around. He hoped it was still around. What's our plan? Kane asked. We're going to take a walk around town, Williams replied. Did any of the employees tell you anything? One of the reasons for stopping by at the coffee shop was to get a sense from the locals. Williams wanted to see if there's any gossip spreading about the figure. The barista said she heard a few customers talking about a strange figure walking about the north of Main Street, Kane replied. I believe it's the same one we're looking for. How long ago was that? About an hour. Are we trying to capture one of them? Williams cocked his head. What have you heard? I heard that Dr. Gomez had found a possible way to freeze them or something. I overheard some of my men and women talking about it. Williams sighed. It was difficult to keep a secret on his base, but ever since the Vazat aliens had emerged, everyone was on heightened alert. Dr. Gomez had approached him with a black vial that he proposed could stop the Vazat aliens from disappearing from them. Williams had been skeptical. Dr. Gomez did say it needed to be proven on the field. His experiments only worked on some cells he had extracted from the purple discoloration. Eventually, Williams had said he would try it out. Dr. Gomez then surprised him by pulling out a modified weapon that had pellets full of the contents of the vial. However, there was a catch. The modified weapon had only one round of pellets, 6 pellets. It was limited, but Dr. Gomez said he needed time to produce more. It also required more cells from a dead Vazat being. Williams hadn't promised anything to Dr. Gomez, but said he would try to get more samples for him. The excitement in Dr. Gomez's eyes had been an understatement. The soldiers have too much free time on the base, Williams growled. The men and women are excited by Dr. Gomez's innovation. And what? Kane paused for a long moment. And the prototype weapon with the pellets. Williams clenched his hands into fists. Are you telling me that information is also circulating around the base? Kane shrugged. Before we left, I did remind the men and women to keep their mouths shut. Williams was fuming at how casually his men and women were sharing information amongst themselves. Humanity was facing an alien species with advanced technology, and all his soldiers could do was gossip. They needed to be alert for any sign of the enemy. Good. Williams finished his coffee and wiped his mouth with a napkin. Are you done, Lieutenant? Yes, sir. Let's move out. It was time to walk to the north part of Main Street. Maybe they would get lucky and find the Vazat alien. Williams had a strong desire to test out Dr. Gomez's weapon. He hoped he would get the chance. Chapter 18, Highway 30, Eastern Plains. Duncan, seated in the back seat of the transport pod, looked outside. Two of his sergeants, Ramos and Stephanie, were in the front seats with Ramos, navigating a transport pod. They were driving down Highway 30, and it had been over 30 minutes since they had left the base. Duncan had opted to bring two of his junior soldiers with him, instead of going alone. With an unknown number of Vazat aliens roaming about, it was too risky to drive on his own. Prior to leaving the base, Duncan had briefed both Ramos and Stephanie on the background. Both of their eyes had brightened when they listened to him. How much longer? Duncan asked. 20 minutes, sir, Ramos replied. Duncan had never traveled down Highway 30. Even then, Duncan found the experience refreshing. Although in the past he never drove out of the base, he was getting accustomed to it. The trip to Henderson had also helped him get away from always being stuck behind his desk. Sir, do we know what to expect with Callum? Stephanie asked. We can assume he's going to share some details of the proprietary technology, Duncan replied. Callum had sounded nervous on the phone call. Duncan had to presume that the man had called him from a remote location, fearing for his own life. Callum believed that whoever had taken Eddie out would be after him. Are we armed? Duncan asked. Yes, sir, Ramos replied. Everything's in the trunk. Good, Duncan said. A while back, Duncan had requested a listing of the soldiers that Captain Area could recommend. After Monroe, it was Ramos and Stephanie. He hoped they both could live up to his expectations. The transport pod hummed with a mechanical pulse as the highway climbed into the mountains. Soon they were in the middle of a forest. Towering trees crowded the edges of the road with their dense canopy blocking out the daylight. Have either of you been out here before? Duncan asked. Stephanie hesitated. No, sir, we don't normally drive out here. Why not? Duncan asked. We heard it's a lonely stretch of road, although it's quite beautiful up here, Stephanie replied. I had a few friends who drove up here and enjoyed it, but I personally haven't been here, Ramos added. Duncan's eyes scanned outside the window. The forest around them felt like a sanctuary and a threat. There was no telling what dangers lurked amongst the trees. Then Ramos slowed the transport pod and turned off a side road. We should be reaching the position Callum gave us. The transport pod's soft rumble was the only thing that reached Duncan's ears as Ramos drove it deeper into the forest. Soon they came to a clearing with a small car park and several marked trails heading in different directions. Ramos switched off the engines. I don't see any other transport pods around here. Maybe he hasn't arrived yet, Stephanie mused. That was one possibility. Ever since encountering the Vazat aliens and their skirmish in the desert, Duncan had learned not to assume anything. After all, these were aliens they were dealing with. Let's get out, Duncan ordered. He then stepped out of the transport pod and stretched his body. He flicked his eyes about the parking lot. It didn't appear that anyone had been in this parking lot for a while. It also explained why Callum had chosen this position. I don't think there's anyone out here at this time, Ramos observed. That helps us, Stephanie said. Duncan agreed. He had no time to deal with civilians. Then a sound reached his ears. He turned and caught sight of another transport pod slowly making its way to the parking lot. Duncan took a step back, pulled out his small weapon and hid it behind his back. He then motioned for Ramos and Stephanie, who took up positions on the other side of the transport pod. Duncan narrowed his eyes. There was one man in the transport pod. He hoped it was Callum and not a random stranger. The transport pod stopped in one of the slots in the parking lot, away from them. A blond-haired man stepped out with his arms raised. My name's Callum. Is that you, General Duncan? The tension in Duncan's face and back dissolved. I'm General Duncan. You can lower your arms. Callum lowered his arms and slowly walked towards him. The man's face was distraught. Reaching Duncan, the man extended his hands. Duncan shook them. Nice to meet you, Callum. What's this all about? Callum looked about nervously. I didn't know if they were listening in on the phone call. Duncan arched his eyebrows. They? Don't tell me you don't know about them, Callum asked. I'm talking about the aliens. How do you know about them? Duncan asked, exchanging looks with Ramos and Stephanie, both of whom wore tight expressions. Callum looked around as if someone was going to attack them. It's easy if I show you. Duncan looked puzzled. Callum motioned to them. There's a reason I picked this spot. Follow me. The man began walking down the trail and Duncan and the rest fell in line behind him. Duncan gripped his weapon tightly as the trail descended into the forest. What's this all about? Duncan asked, still confused as to where they were heading. It's about the proprietary technology that we use for Eddie's project, Callum replied. A few minutes later, the trail came upon a small lake. Callum stopped at the edge of the lake. This is where we found it. Found what? Ramos asked. The alien vessel, Callum replied. Chapter 19, Storage Facility Anderson. Lucas was at the head of the queue. He looked at all the occupied service counter staff. Only 2 of them remained to help the customers. He glanced back at the queue. It had grown. In fact, the queue was nearly at the front door. His gaze fell upon his 2 security guards who remained seated but alert. The company should activate more service counter staff. If not, it was going to be a long day for those in the back of the queue. Next, please. Lucas walked over to the rightmost service counter staff. Reaching the middle-aged woman, Lucas explained about the storage account under his father's name. He then passed his own identification. The lady gazed at the console in front of her. After a few minutes, she passed him an access code and directed him to a door on the right. Lucas thanked the woman and walked through the door. He opened the door and glanced once at his security guards who acknowledged him. Then Lucas slipped inside. The door revealed a long corridor with multiple doors on the left and right. Lucas stopped at the second door on his right. He pressed on the panel beside it with the access code given to him by the service counter staff and stepped inside. The cool, sterile air of the chamber tickled his skin. The chamber was large, but his attention fell upon the wall at the back. The wall was covered by rows and rows of small vaults, their steel doors gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The chamber resembled walking into a high-security bank vault. Each of the small vaults were marked by an identifier. At one corner of the wall was a centralized panel. Lucas approached it and studied the sleek, seamless panel with its touch-sensitive interface glowing softly. Lucas ran his fingers on the panel as he felt the coolness of the surface. The display on the panel responded to his touch with a string of digits appearing on it. His mind recalled the access code the service counter had given him. He entered the sequence with precision, each press of the panel being deliberate. Then he took a step back and waited. A hum filled the chamber. His eyes scanned the row of vaults in front of him. A beeping sound followed and one of the vaults on the left side opened. Lucas walked towards it and pulled it out. His hands trembled as he put his hands in and found a data pad. He had expected a folder, but then again, he had to realize he was dealing with his father. He pulled the data pad out, its sleek metallic surface cold to his touch. The tension in the air was palpable as he placed it on a small table beside the wall. Lucas took a seat, glanced once at the door before turning his attention to the data pad. Another secret. His father had left this here. For what reason he didn't know, but he was about to find out. With a swift motion, Lucas tapped the edge of the data pad, activating its surface. The display flickered on, casting a pale blue glow across his face. A few seconds later, the display changed to show a password. Lucas frowned. It wasn't an access code. Just like his father to make it difficult for him. Lucas typed in the same password he had used at the secret chamber in the middle of Gibson Desert. He inhaled a sharp breath as his fingers pressed on the button. A few seconds passed as the screen changed. The password had worked. Excitement began to form in his heart. The use of the password hinted that whatever was inside the datapad was linked to the Vazat aliens. He had no doubt about it. Now the screen displayed a folder. Lucas clicked on it. Inside was a document, only one document. Lucas clicked it open. His jaw dropped as his eyes scanned the contents of the document. At the top of the document were 3 words in bold. The Ment Treaty. Lucas had never heard of it. His father had also never mentioned it to him. Lucas looked at the date of the treaty. It was 30 years ago. He began reading the multi-page document. His heart pounded as he devoured the contents. It was incredible. He couldn't believe his eyes. Tudor Ment had struck a deal with the Vazat aliens that would keep them at bay from unleashing their mission on humanity. Lucas read and reread all the clauses in the agreement. It was fascinating. How had his father gotten the wizard to agree to all these clauses? That was the missing part. The document didn't stipulate how it had been done, only what needed to be done. It also didn't indicate the mission of the wizard aliens. Lucas copied all the contents of the agreement to his device, shut off the datapad, and returned it to the container. He closed the mailbox-like container and left the room. Now, he had a better sense of the details of the agreement that had forced the wizard aliens to keep a low profile for so long. As he stepped back into the corridor, a sound reached his ears. Lucas turned around. A figure in a robe stood at the other end of the corridor. Chapter 20, Neighborhood Anderson. Arya walked casually down the road leading to the intersection with the road having Mr. Griffith's home. She inspected her holster. The alien weapon that Lucas meant General Duncan's friend had found was with her. Duncan had insisted she take it with her. It was a small weapon, but she had been warned that it was powerful and could kill a wizard alien. That was enough for her. As the intersection came into view, she slowed down. They would need to be careful once they crossed the intersection. Whoever was inside Mr. Griffith's home may be on the lookout for them. She placed her bet that it was the wizard aliens. Mr. Griffith's story about his transport pod was a good one, but the fact that he hadn't raised a police report was a red flag. No one would forget to raise a police report when their transport pod was stolen. It defied all logic. If the wizard aliens had been inside with Mr. Griffith, they wouldn't have been able to pick up on it. For a human being, filing a police report was common sense. There would be no valid reason not to do it. She suspected that Mr. Griffith had used that cover story as a means of alerting them to his situation. Once they were at the intersection, Monroe looked at her. What now? Arya motioned ahead. We keep walking. Her eyes scanned down the road. Further down was Mr. Griffith's home. Monroe looked a bit confused. Arya then explained to Monroe that she planned to enter Mr. Griffith's home from his backyard. Arya led Monroe across the road and towards the second intersection. Her heart was pounding. Hopefully the wizard aliens hadn't detected them. They stopped at the second intersection, turned right, and started walking along a new road. The walls surrounding the backyards of the row of houses were beside them. Arya kept scanning the vicinity. A forest loomed on her left. Do you think the wizard aliens came from the forest? Monroe asked. I believe so. She guessed the wizard aliens may have landed their vessel somewhere in the forest. Although she was tempted to go and find their vessel, now wasn't the time for it. They needed to first deal with the situation inside Mr. Griffith's home. Should we call in reinforcements? Monroe asked. We need to first confirm they're inside Mr. Griffith's home. Having the military come down into a neighborhood on a large scale would cause too much commotion. Arya also didn't want to scare away the wizard aliens. No one still knew enough about the wizard aliens and how they moved around. The bright light remained a mystery. She made a mental count as they passed each home. Then she came to a halt. Are we here already? Monroe asked. It's the next home. Arya eyed the wall ahead of them. There was no back entrance. They would need to climb over the wall. She kept her body close to the wall as she crept forward. Reaching the corner of Mr. Griffith's backyard wall, Arya turned to Monroe. I'm going in first. Keep an eye out for anything. Monroe pulled out his weapon and nodded. Arya grabbed hold of the wall, her boots finding a secure foothold. As her head reached the top of the wall, Arya flicked her eyes about. The backyard had an outdoor seating area and a small outdoor shack. Other than that, it was empty. She pulled herself up over the wall and dropped onto the other side, her boots making no sound. Arya quickly raced towards the shack, taking cover behind it. Her breathing was ragged as she drew her weapon. Monroe followed her over the wall and was soon beside her. Arya's eyes scanned the back of Mr. Griffith's home. Monroe nudged her. I thought I saw someone in the kitchen. Arya turned her gaze in that direction. A figure was moving around the kitchen. From her vantage point, she recognized that it wasn't Mr. Griffith. It was someone taller than him, but the part that struck her was that the figure was wearing a hood and a robe. It's them, Monroe muttered. They had gotten the confirmation they needed. The wizard aliens were inside Mr. Griffith's home. There's another one, Monroe said. Arya realized multiple wizard aliens were roaming about the home. Can you get a visual on Mr. Griffith? Negative. Arya gritted her teeth. She hadn't expected to encounter multiple wizard aliens. They must be blackmailing him like Mr. Mullins, Monroe whispered. Arya agreed. It was the only way the Wizard seemed to get control of the people. Before heading out to this neighborhood, she had forgotten to check if Mr. Griffith had any children. That was a mistake. Then the sound of shattering glass reached Arya's ears. Streaks of weapons fire slammed against the outdoor shack. Arya sighed. They had been detected. Chapter 21, Car Park 34, off Highway 30. Duncan's eyes widened. Are you telling me there was an alien vessel in this lake? Callum looked at him. Not that there was. The alien vessel is still buried in the waters of this lake. Duncan turned to Ramos and Stephanie. Take up positions around here. The two soldiers moved away from him and Callum and took up positions on either side of the trail. Duncan didn't want any random hikers coming along this trail. He turned his attention back to Callum. Maybe you can start at the beginning. Callum offered a single nod and took a deep breath. Eddie and I came from the same college years ago. Fast forward, we met up 2 years ago at MXT-4. We recognized each other and then were assigned to similar projects. During the fall 2 years ago, we drove up here. We were supposed to come up with a few friends, but it ended up being just the two of us. We came here and set up camp at one of the campgrounds not far from this lake. It's on the other side of the lake. That's when we saw it. The alien vessel? Callum nodded. We first thought it was a piece of debris jutting out of the lake. Maybe part of a truck or something. We didn't pay much attention to it. Then Eddie noticed the scribblings on one side of it. We studied it and realized the symbols were not something from this world. Duncan cocked his head. I know, it sounds strange. How would two guys in the middle of this forest know that the symbols were from an alien species, right? Eddie had a linguistics background on top of his other talents. So Eddie had a way to verify whether the symbols belonged to any known language on this planet. Once Eddie did it, we realized the symbols belonged to an alien species. Duncan glanced back at his soldiers, who he could sense were trying to listen to Callum's words. What did you do then? Eddie decided to swim out to the middle of the lake and take a closer look, Callum explained. I wasn't so excited to do that. I mean, it's an alien debris. It could be dangerous. But Eddie was bold, which I should have expected. Even back in college, Eddie had an extreme streak in him. He would do the wackiest of things that none of us would even think of doing. What did you find in the debris? Duncan asked, trying to keep his patience from running out. On the part of the debris that was above the waterline, Eddie found a small door. You mean this wasn't a random piece of debris but an actual vessel? Yes, that's what we found. Eddie managed to pry open the door and peek inside. There were two dead aliens inside, at least their bodies. Eddie panicked when he saw the first alien bodies. He thought they were alive, but they were dead. He then pulled out some things from inside the vessel. Which became your proprietary technology, huh? Once Eddie got them out, he shut the door and brought them back to our campsite. I'm sure you can guess that we spent the rest of our night looking at these alien artifacts. Neither of us could sleep. Who could when you have alien artifacts in front of you, right? Both of us were on a high that night. We couldn't believe our luck in finding the technology. To us scientists, it opened several possibilities. And that's where the project was born. We brought it to our supervisors and they gave us a chance to try it. You didn't tell them the truth, right? Callum shot a weary smile. Not a chance. They might think we were crazy and fire us on the spot. Eddie and I made a pact to keep this a secret for as long as we could. Is the alien vessel still in the lake? Duncan asked. Chapter 22, North Main Street, Anderson. Captain Williams pressed his fingers against Dr. Gomez's weapon on his holster. He was glad that Dr. Gomez had modified a small arms weapon. He didn't want to be seen carrying a large weapon. That would draw too much attention, which he didn't need. They passed by several local folks who smiled at them. Williams returned the smile while Kane wished them well. Williams never had the desire to settle down in a small town. It was just not in his blood. He couldn't tell why, but that was life. The lack of desire had probably pushed him to enlist, especially after he had left his family. This town is nice, Kane admitted. Have you been here before? Williams shook his head. Most towns like this are. Despite that, Williams had little time to visit towns, and he had no desire to. Ever since he joined the military years ago, he had put all his heart into serving. There was nothing else left to do. After leaving his family, he became isolated and lived alone. He didn't want to even start a relationship, and he never looked back. The truth was that there was nothing back there for him. He walked away from everything without a concern in the world. He was happy with his choice. But everything changed when he ran into his brother again. "We're entering the northern section now," Kane announced. Williams narrowed his eyes as he looked around this part of Main Street. On both sides there were a variety of restaurants and shops. One shop had balloons around it, probably a new business or one celebrating a milestone. It brought back memories of his time with his brother, Duncan. Only a year separated the two of them. When they were very young, they had been inseparable. His parents had always loved their unity. It was unfortunate how things had turned out years later. Williams pushed those thoughts aside. He didn't have the luxury of dwelling in the past. Humanity was facing an existential threat. No one still understood what the Vazat aliens were doing on the Western continent. That lack of knowledge was worrisome. In the distance, a bigger building stood out with its own parking lot. Kane must have observed it too. That building looks out of place. Williams' gaze fell upon the signage. It seemed to be a storage facility. Williams wasn't surprised. Such facilities were common in every town around here. Williams nudged Kane and they crossed the road to the side having the storage facility building. "Do you notice them?" Kane asked. Williams nodded. There were several men in black suits standing beside their transport pod. It was obvious someone important was inside the storage facility building, and these men were the security detail. Williams' curiosity was piqued by the security detail. Was it a coincidence, or was it linked to the appearance of the Vazat alien in this part of Anderson? Williams wasn't sure, but it was worth investigating. "I think we better visit the storage facility building." Chapter 23, Small Lake off Highway 30. "It still should be here unless the aliens found it and removed it," Callum replied. Duncan was still reeling from how the two men discovered the crashed alien vessel, especially considering that none of the satellites or other sensors even knew of the alien vessel. It was a colossal failure for humanity. Despite that, Duncan had to give some grace to humanity. The Vazat aliens probably had highly advanced technology that couldn't be detected by humanity. That was something Duncan hoped could change. With the examination of the captured alien vessels still ongoing, finding a way to detect those vessels would be a high priority, or even the highest priority. If humanity couldn't detect the alien vessels, they were at a significant disadvantage, which in Duncan's eyes was unacceptable. "Do you want to see if the vessel is still here?" Callum asked. Duncan jerked his head back. "You mean there's a way to tell?" Callum gave a single nod. "Not from this side of the lake, but I think we can get a bit of a view from the other side." "Lead us," Duncan said, motioning to his soldiers to follow them. Duncan followed Callum as he led them along a dirt path around the lake. The path seemed to have not been visited by many people in recent months. Callum turned to him. "Very few people come down here. Most make it to the car park to use the services and then walk a bit, but to get here you need to walk a bit longer." "I can see that." Duncan wasn't the kind of person who liked to hike. Even growing up, he shied away from it. Growing up, when his father tried to take him and his brother on treks, Duncan was the first to come up with an excuse. His father always frowned on him. Williams was the opposite of him. He was more adventurous and willing to go on hikes with their father. In the end, most of those hikes became something his brother and their father did. In hindsight, Duncan realized he had missed the opportunity to bond with his father during those trips. His brother must have loved the trips because he always returned from them with a big smile across his face. Walking now along this makeshift path, Duncan still didn't feel anything towards walking in forests. It was a foreign concept. He couldn't understand how people enjoyed it. There were more important things to learn than walking about in places like this. He stole a sideways glance at his sergeants. Ramos wore a stoic expression as he followed them, but Stephanie had a smile on her face as she seemed to take in her surroundings. Duncan didn't have to guess that Stephanie loved being out in nature. He was fine with that because he didn't want all his soldiers to be the same. Coming into the United Alliance, he wanted to bring their different perspectives with them. That would help diminish any group thinking that might be detrimental to command. While adhering to the chain of command was important, Duncan understood listening to others was another useful skill. Callum came to a stop. And it was only then that Duncan realized they were already on the other side of the lake. Callum walked to the water's edge and peered deeper into the lake. Is it still there? Duncan asked as Ramos and Stephanie took up their positions. Callum didn't say anything for a while. Duncan flicked his eyes around the lake. At this hour it was peaceful out here. Duncan began to slowly understand why his brother loved the outdoors. I can see a small tip of it, Callum replied. Duncan approached the man's side. Where? Callum pointed his right hand towards the center of the lake. Duncan narrowed his eyes. Then he saw it, a small metal piece jutting out from the waters. It wasn't easy to see unless you knew what you were looking for. Does anyone take boats out onto the lake? Duncan asked. Callum shook his head. Not that I know of, but a canoe might work. Duncan considered whether he should send military divers to this lake to salvage the vessel. He wasn't sure if it was necessary since they already had an alien vessel back on the base. What made you think the aliens killed Eddie? Duncan asked. Once we started on the project, I began to have this feeling we were being watched, Callum said. I told Eddie about it, but he brushed me off. He kept saying no one knew that they had found the wreckage. I did agree with him, but I also felt that since we were dealing with alien technology, we couldn't assume everything was okay. Eddie didn't change his mind, right? No, he was too focused on the project and creating an advanced telescope. He felt alien technology could push our capabilities forward by decades. Again, I agreed with his purpose. Did you see anyone following you? Duncan asked. I couldn't tell at first, but sometimes when I left my workplace, I thought I was being watched. By whom? The first time I noticed a figure in the distance near the bus transport stand. I thought the figure was just waiting for the bus and I ignored him. Then, 3 days later, I noticed the figure again. Do you remember what the figure looked like? Callum shook his head. I think he was wearing a hood. I wanted to confront him, but I thought it wasn't a good idea to do that at my workplace. Duncan caught Ramos staring at him. The man must have heard about the figure and connected the dots. But how would they know that you and Eddie had taken something? Duncan asked. I thought about that too. The only thing that came to my mind then was that whatever we had taken was giving off a signal of some sort. I did try to scan the artifact we had stolen from the alien vessel, but it didn't show me anything. What about Eddie? He just told me that I was imagining things. Then, when I heard that Eddie had died in a freak accident at his home, I got scared. I knew the alien being had found us and taken Eddie out. Duncan realized that was as much as he was going to get from the man. Thanks for meeting me out here and showing me this lake. We'll take it over from here. Callum sported a worried expression. I can't go home now. Can you help me? Don't you have a family? Duncan asked. I live alone, Callum replied. Can you protect me? I'll help you with anything you need on the alien species situation. Duncan nodded. Having another scientist to join them at the base would help matters, and keeping Callum there would help protect him. Duncan turned his attention back to the lake. How long ago had this alien vessel crashed into this lake, and why hadn't the aliens found it yet? He presumed that if the aliens had found it, they would have removed their vessel or at least destroyed it. Since neither had happened, it meant either the Vazat aliens were still on the lookout for this vessel or had given up on finding it. Ramos approached Duncan. Sir, what shall we do about the wreckage? Nothing for now, Duncan replied, watching Callum stand around the trees a bit. Put up a few sensors. I want to know the moment anyone appears at this site. Chapter 24, Mr. Griffith's home, Anderson. Kofia observed Juram firing his weapon through the back window of Mr. Griffith's house. She clenched her jaw. She was upset that the junior officer hadn't checked in with her before unleashing his weapon. His impulsive actions had just caused her a big headache. When she had first caught sight of the two military personnel climbing the back wall, she had been shocked. It had implied the military knew that they were in the home. Prior to Juram disrupting everything, she had planned to sneak out of the front of the home. No one would have noticed her, but the military's arrival had thrown a wrench into their escape plan. Now they would need to fight their way through. Kofia ducked below the kitchen counter as weapons fire roared in her direction. She pulled out a weapon and grimaced. At the same time, a thought came into her mind. Could this be the same military that had stolen one of their vessels? If so, could she use them to communicate her willingness to help them? The thought lingered a bit longer than necessary in her mind as more glass shattered all around her. Juram needed to learn to be more disciplined. Weapons fire in this neighborhood would attract a lot of unwanted attention. Even as he fired at them, the human military could be sending dozens of their soldiers to surround this home. If that happened, Kofi and Juram would have no way to escape. Getting captured by humanity was not an option. The Wizard had clear protocols on what to do if capture was imminent. "What's going on?" a voice shouted from behind her. Then a scream permeated the air, followed by a thud. Kofia glanced back. Mr. Griffith's body was on the floor. He was writhing in pain. Kofia crawled over and looked the man in the eyes. "You need to stop moving. I'll get you help." I, Mr. Griffith muttered. She went into her pocket but realized she had forgotten to bring a medipatch with her. Kofia sighed. Her gaze fell upon a growing pool of blood beside Mr. Griffith. The man grabbed her hand. "Help my daughter. I know you want to help her." Kofia was shocked by the man's words. How did he know that she wanted to help humans? Had she given off some signal? If she had, she needed to be careful in the future. If Captain Sooty ever suspected anything, he wouldn't hesitate to make an example of her. Before she could say another word, Mr. Griffith's head slumped backwards. He was dead. "Juram!" Kofia hollered. The junior officer came to her side. "What happened?" "He's dead because of your actions," Kofia growled. "Dead?" Kofia nudged towards the backyard. "By the military enemy fire." Juram ran his hands over his hood. "I didn't mean to." Kofi had no time for his apology. "We need to get out of here. Send a message to Turim to meet us at the vessel now." Chapter 25, Storage Facility Anderson. Lucas didn't hesitate. He pressed on the emergency button on his device. It would send an immediate alert to the security guards outside. Lucas then shouted at the Vazat alien. "Who are you?" The Vazat alien remained silent. "What do you want with me?" Lucas demanded. Where was his security guards? They should have been here by now. The Vazat alien pointed its right hand at him, as if he was being condemned to death. Lucas meant, "You shouldn't have meddled in our affairs. The treaty has expired." "Who signed the treaty?" Lucas demanded. "If you don't know that, you are a bigger fool than I thought." "Why are you here on this planet?" Lucas asked. The Vazat opened its mouth and laughed. "You think you can stop us? You can't stop us. We will destroy your human species." The door behind Lucas slammed open and two of his security guards barreled in with their weapons drawn out. Lucas kept his eyes on the Vazat alien. A faint light began to glow from the figure. Realizing what was about to transpire, Lucas hit the ground and hollered at his security men. "Get down now." Instead of following his instructions, the security guards began discharging their weapons at the Vazat alien. Lucas looked on in horror as the light in the center of the Vazat alien's body began to grow brighter. All the streaks of weapons fire had no effect, none. They simply disappeared into the light. It was as if the Vazat alien was invincible in the current state. Lucas forced his head to stare at the ground. He didn't want to look at it. His heart was pounding. Then two thuds rocked the corridor. Lucas looked up. Both his security guards were on the ground with chest wounds. They were dead. Lucas heaved a loud sigh and turned back, but the Vazat alien was gone. As he staggered to his feet, two more of his security guards raced into the corridor. Lucas pointed behind him. There was a figure wearing a robe. It must have gone that way. The two guards pounded past him and checked the opposite end of the corridor, where a large window stood. Lucas didn't have to guess that the Vazat alien must have jumped out of the window. It's the only thing that he could conclude. One of the security guards turned to him. "Sir, the figure has disappeared." "Find it," Lucas ordered. He needed to know about what the Vazat aliens planned to do. Although the Men Treaty document didn't state it, the Vazat had been waiting a long while to spring their plans on humanity. Chapter 26, North Main Street, Anderson. The sound of screams reached Captain Williams' ears. A few of the security guards who had been standing around the transport pods rushed into the building. "What's going on?" Kane asked. Williams pulled out his weapon and Dr. Gomez's special one. "I think we're about to meet the alien." He then picked up the pace as they neared the building. A few people raced out of the front entrance. Williams nudged Kane. "Get those people away from the parking lot." Kane noted and sprinted in the direction of the people. Williams began moving to the other end of the building. Then he spotted the figure. alien was slowly walking away, trying not to stand out. Williams broke into a run, motioning to Kane. Kane caught his signal and looked at the figure walking away. Williams pointed his weapon at the figure but then stopped. He switched to Dr. Gomez's weapon. A faint light began to appear on the figure. It was transforming into light. Now or never. Williams aimed the weapon and fired one pellet at the figure. The pellet shot out of his modified weapon and hit its target. The alien figure staggered backwards. The light vanished. Williams raced over, firing his regular weapon at the figure, who was now on the ground. Williams stood in front of the figure, pointing his weapon at it. "Don't make any moves." The alien hissed. "What did you do to me?" "I said don't move," Williams threatened as Kane came up beside him. "You think you've won, but you haven't," the alien scowled. "You don't know what's coming." It then pressed on something on his chest. Williams' eyes widened. He shoved Kane to one side and dove away. An explosion ripped into the air, shaking the ground beneath them. Williams kept rolling away as a cloud of dust hovered over the area. Williams coughed repeatedly and blinked, not once but a few times. His eyes were stinging from all the dust. He felt a sharp pain in his leg. Williams glanced down and found a tear in his skin on his right leg. Williams winced as he rummaged through his pockets for a medipatch. Finding one, he pulled it out and applied it to his leg. The impact was quick. The bleeding stopped on the spot. Williams then looked around for his lieutenant. Kane's body lay sprawled a distance away. Williams began to crawl on his stomach until he reached Lieutenant Kane. He touched the man's chest. He was still breathing. Williams heaved a sigh of relief. By now, his leg was better and he got on his knees. Then he staggered to his feet. One of the security guards approached him. "Are you injured?" Williams shook his head. "Can you help my lieutenant?" The security guard nodded and knelt beside Lieutenant Kane. By now, Kane's eyes were open. Williams picked up both weapons. He holstered Dr. Gomez's weapon. At least he had proven the pellet worked on the alien. It had kept the alien from transforming into the light and probably saved their lives. Another man approached Williams as Kane was helped to his feet. "Are you from the United Alliance?" the man asked. Williams hesitated. "We are from the coalition forces. My name's Captain Williams." The man took a step back. "You're far away from your base, Captain," Williams grunted. Then the man's eyes widened. "I don't believe it. You're General Duncan's brother." Chapter 27, Mr. Griffith's Home, Anderson. Captain Arias slammed her body against the side of Mr. Griffith's home. Sweat had begun pooling around her neck. She was breathing hard. The two aliens inside the home were relentless. But suddenly the weapons fire had come to a halt. Was this a new trick to distract them? They couldn't let their guard down. Not against the Vazat aliens. Arias stole a sideways glance down at the side of the home. She signaled to Monroe to stay where he was. She then crept forward along the side until she reached the front. She peeked in the direction of the front door. It was still closed. This was the only way out for the aliens. Monroe was covering the back entrance, making it nearly impossible for them to escape from the rear. Arias inched forward until she had a direct line of sight to the front door. She positioned her weapon and waited. The plan was to flush them out. She checked her device. It was about time. Weapons fire could be heard from the backyard. Monroe was doing his part in the plan. Hopefully, the intense weapons fire would force the Vazat aliens to make a mistake. Movement caught her eyes. The front door was opening. Arias' body stiffened. This was it. She had only one chance to take down the aliens. She had to make it count. Her heart was pounding as the door fully opened. But no one stepped out. Arias was tempted to inch forward, but she held her ground. She didn't want to alert the aliens to her presence. Then a light ripped through the front door. Arias' jaw dropped as her hands trembled. She tried to aim at the blinding light, but it disappeared down the road. She sighed as she pulled her weapon back. Her understanding of the blinding light wasn't complete. A sound reached her ears. Someone else was still at the front door. Arias' body stiffened as she aimed her weapon at it. A female Vazat alien stepped out of the front door. Surprisingly, the alien had removed her hood, making it easy to recognize her. Arias took a step forward. "Don't move." The female alien stood still. "Don't shoot. I'm not armed." With that, the female alien raised her hands. Arias caught sight of the 3 fingers on each hand. She swallowed hard. She was dealing with an alien from somewhere else. When she enlisted to the United Alliance, she never thought of being in such a situation. Not in her wildest imagination. Her goal had been to serve and protect the faction and its beliefs, not encounter aliens from another planet. Don't move, Aria repeated as she slowly approached the female alien who was wearing a long robe. I sent my junior officer away, the female alien said. I don't have much time to talk to you. Talk about what? Aria scowled. About the message I sent to the alien vessel that you captured. Aria's eyes widened. What? How? The female alien turned towards her. My name is Kofia. I'm the one who sent that message to you. Did you receive it? Aria offered a clumsy nod. She felt like she was in a dream. Who are you? I'm someone who doesn't believe the way things are going is the right way, Kofia replied. Aria didn't know why, but she believed in the alien and pulled back her weapon. I don't understand. There are many things I want to tell you, but this isn't the time. Come with us, Aria offered, without even thinking of the implications. Was she even allowed to make such an offer to a Vazat alien? Then a sound emerged from behind Aria. She glanced back. Sergeant Monroe was standing with his mouth open. Sergeant, lower your weapon. Kofia here is the one who sent us the secret message. Kofia smiled at them. So you did receive it. Aria nodded. Kofia's expression darkened. I'm sorry to tell you that Mr. Griffith is dead. He got caught in the crossfire. Aria ran her fingers through her hair. Monroe, check on him. Monroe nodded and walked past Kofia and into the home. What do you want from us? Aria asked, still reeling from the fact that she was talking to an alien from another planet. I want to help you, Kofia announced. How can I trust you? Aria asked. You can. Tell me one thing then. What's that blinding light we see when we meet one of your kind? It's our way of moving quickly through your planet. We can't do it all the time because it requires a lot of energy from our being. Just now you saw it, right? Yes, that was my junior officer leaving this home. I sent him out to check on another of our kind. He'll be back soon. Chapter 28, General's Office, United Alliance 1. General Duncan drummed his fingers on his desk. Captain Aria had left him a message, but she hadn't updated him on the status of following up on the person who owned the transport pod. The drive back from Highway 30 had been without incident. Sergeant Ramos had joined Callum as both their transport pods had returned to the base. Duncan felt it was better to keep Callum here. He would be an asset for his men and women. Once they reached the base, Duncan had ordered Ramos to get Callum a meal and assign him quarters. The former employee of MXT-4 looked weak and distraught, possibly from hiding for his life from the Vazat. On the base, Callum would be safe, at least safer than out there in the unknown. There was a knock at the door. Come in, Duncan hollered. Sergeant Ramos stepped in. Sir, is our guest comfortable? Yes, sir. I showed Callum to his quarters and then took him to the dining hall. He's now right there eating his meal. Excellent. Did he say anything during the drive? Ramos hesitated. He was rambling on and on about the aliens. I think he's quite terrified of them. I think he's been hiding from them for days. That's understandable since he thought the Vazat were after him. Ramos arched his eyebrows. Sir, you don't think the Vazat wanted to kill him? If they did want to kill him, I feel they would have done it by now. I think the Vazat were after Eddie who stole their technology. Once they eliminated him, they were satisfied. But what about killing his wife? Duncan sighed. I still don't know why they had to kill her. Does Callum know about Jen's death? Duncan asked. Unfortunately, he does. He even asked me about her, but I didn't say much. I'll give him some work to do, Duncan said. That will hopefully keep his mind off the aliens. Ramos nodded. That will be all. Dismissed. Ramos saluted and left his office. Duncan had the suspicion that someone was trying to eliminate all the loose ends. But why keep Callum alive? Maybe Callum had been smart enough to be on the move and avoid the aliens. Or maybe Callum had been lucky. Either way, the man was here, now, and Duncan's responsibility. Along the drive back, Duncan had mulled over everything Callum had said. It was incredible how Eddie had found something so advanced. By sheer luck, they had made a discovery that had cost him and his wife their lives. It was a tragic end. If Eddie had chosen to share it with others, maybe he would be still alive today. Or maybe people would have thought he was crazy and imprisoned him. Duncan suppressed a sigh. A buzz on his console interrupted his thoughts. Duncan pressed on the console. It was Senior Combat Engineer Taylor. Taylor, do you have something for me? Duncan asked. I found that the alien vessel has a pretty strong shield around it, Taylor announced. Duncan frowned. He wasn't surprised by that news. Was that why the senior combat engineer had called him? Taylor continued, but I found a weakness in one of the vessel's shields. Duncan straightened himself in his chair. What kind of weakness? In our next engagement, we can take advantage of it. I'll send you the details now, and I'll keep working on the rest of the vessel. Good work. With that, the comms ended. Duncan hoped his fighter ships would have another engagement with the alien vessel. Chapter 29, North Main Street, Anderson. William's jaw dropped. How? Fortunately for him, Kane was still being helped up by the security guard. Williams didn't want his lieutenant to know of his connection to his brother, not yet at least. The man turned his head at Kane and nodded. My name's Lucas Ment, the man said, extending his hand. As in the Ment Empire, Williams asked. Lucas smiled. I don't think it's an empire, but yes, that's my family. Williams shook Lucas's hand. What are you doing out here? Shouldn't I be asking you the same question, Lucas said, leaning over Williams' shoulder. Is that a Bazat alien? Williams glanced back. It was before it activated a device to kill us all. After the Bazat alien had detonated a grenade-like device, there was nothing much left for them to see. Only a pool of purple liquid remained. The famous purple color, Lucas said with a smirk. Is it part of their blood? Kane asked. I think it's their blood, Lucas mused, which is probably why we are seeing it everywhere. Williams turned his attention back to the man. What are you doing here? I was following up on a lead from my father, Lucas said. Williams cocked his head. I thought, Lucas cut in, yes, Tudor men passed away some time ago. But apparently, he knew of the Bazat aliens. What? Kane hollered, who by now was standing and alert. Williams motioned for his lieutenant to keep his voice down. What do you mean? Lucas gestured to them and they walked away from the alleyway back to his transport pod. His security guards kept their distance. The man looked about before lowering his voice. I believe my father met the Bazat aliens 30 years ago. You mean that's when they first came to Earth? Kane asked. Lucas shrugged. That I'm not sure of. All I know is my father met them and even signed a treaty with them. It's called the Ment Treaty. Williams scratched his head. What kind of treaty? Lucas shared with him and Kane of the Ment Treaty. Williams listened intensely while his eyes scanned the parking lot. Most of the people who had rushed out of the storage facility had left the area. A local police transport pod was now parked at the entrance, and one of Lucas Ment's security guards was talking with the officer. At the end of the sharing, Kane frowned. How was Tudor Ment able to make an agreement with the Bazat aliens? Williams shared his lieutenant's sentiments. It was astonishing that Tudor Ment had some level of control over the Bazat. Williams could only come to one conclusion. Tudor had something big over the aliens and used it to his advantage. If not, it was impossible for the Bazat to bow to a human. Lucas turned to him. I know what you're thinking. My father must have blackmailed the aliens, but I still don't know what he had over them that was so powerful. It must have been very powerful, Kane muttered. Lieutenant, cordon this area and call in the medics to take away what's left of the Bazat, Williams ordered. Lucas rubbed his chin. Captain, I don't think that will be necessary. Williams dropped his gaze to the dead alien and his eyes widened. The pool of purple liquid had disappeared. Huh? What happened? Lucas shrugged. I don't know, but no one would be able to even tell that someone died here, let alone an alien being. Williams grunted. Captain, why don't we grab a coffee so that we can exchange stories on our not-so-friendly aliens? Lucas asked. Another coffee would be just the thing that Williams needed right now. Chapter 30, Fighter Ship UA Squadron. Squadron Leader Thomas navigated his fighter jet along the perimeter around United Alliance 1 base. Ever since General Duncan had briefed him on the assault by aliens on the newly established base bordering Wiley Forest, Thomas's squadron had been activated to run patrols. Today was his turn and he had Lieutenant Wilmore as his wingman. How's everything, Lieutenant? All clear, sir, Wilmore replied. Stay alert. Sir, is it true our radars may not be able to detect their vessels? You heard that part, huh? Thomas asked. It was the part of the sharing by General Duncan that bothered him the most. The general was making an educated guess that the Bazat alien vessels were undetectable, based only on the fact that the aliens had been around for at least 30 years. That was a big assumption, but no one, not even General Duncan, knew the truth. Yes, sir. Hopefully the engineers studying the alien vessel on the base will be able to tell us some new information. Thomas had heard that Senior Combat Engineer Taylor was overseeing the study of the alien vessel. He was hopeful they would make quick progress. Anything discovered might help his squadron in the skies. I hope so, sir. If not, we are really flying blind up here. That's why we need to rely less on our senses and more on our eyes, Thomas reminded his lieutenant. Depending on the equipment with an unknown enemy was a huge risk. The enemy could have an untold number of ways to jam them. Once the sharing by General Duncan had been completed, his squadron had met Thomas separately. Some were still reeling from the revelations of alien beings walking amongst them. It even seemed surreal to Thomas, but he had accepted it without question. His squadron had also thrown many questions at him. However, Thomas had been unable to give them meaningful answers, or at least answers that would reassure them. The reality was that his squadron was up against alien vessels. I went down to the hangar and saw the alien vessel, Wilmore announced. Thomas frowned as his eyes kept scanning the vicinity. He himself hadn't had the time to check up on the alien vessel. How was it? The vessel's quite incredible and its hull is sleek, but you can't tell much else, Wilmore replied. I couldn't even tell where their weapons were. There weren't any visible turrets. They must be hidden. I think so too. I heard that Lucas Ment flew the vessel. That was news to Thomas. From the famous Ment family? The one and only, sir. Thomas frowned. The base was abuzz with gossip ever since the alien vessel had been brought in. This was to be expected. Humans loved talking about things they had no control over. Nonetheless, Thomas didn't like it. Everyone on the base had to be getting ready for the aliens, not spending time mindlessly talking about things. All this gossip took time away from the important things. I heard that many soldiers died on one of the coalition forces' bases. I didn't know that. The surprise in Lieutenant Wilmore's tone was evident. Thomas suppressed a chuckle. It seemed like Wilmore didn't know everything that was going on. That's why we are patrolling up here, Thomas added, hoping his words brought a sense of urgency to his lieutenant. Complacency was at the root of many problems, especially in the military context and in the middle of a war. General Duncan had lightly touched on it, but Thomas knew the man was worried about it. It was inevitable. Now that there was a ceasefire in place, everyone would use the opportunity to regroup. But that wasn't the purpose of the ceasefire. It was to refocus on the new enemy. However, Thomas wasn't sure if such comms had trickled down to the front lines or across all the military bases. What else have you heard? Thomas asked. Wilmore sighed. There's been too much chatter ever since the ceasefire rolled out. It was as Thomas had feared. The ceasefire was working against him. I know we need to prepare for the alien war, but I don't think the soldiers on the ground got the message, Wilmore added. I'll need to remind General Duncan about it. Sir, do you see that? Thomas's body stiffened. Where? 9 o'clock. I see a glint in the distance, but I can't tell what it is. Thomas squinted his eyes. He saw it too. He then checked his senses. Nothing. But there was something flying a distance away, and it was coming at them. Chapter 31. Mr. Griffith's home, Anderson. Arya was speechless for a few seconds. Are you saying that your species can move at faster than light speeds? Something like that. As I said, we can't do it all the time. Whoa. I know it's a lot to understand right now, but you must believe that I want to help you. Arya decided to try her luck, still not knowing whether to trust Kofia or not. Where's your base? Kofia's eyes widened. Yeah, we know there's a base somewhere on this continent. I'm impressed by you humans, Kofia said softly. You're quite versatile. When humanity is pushed into a corner, we do surprise ourselves. I see. Now do you trust me? Trust takes time, Kofia. I understand. My species has been killing your kind for days now. I wouldn't expect anything less. Kofia kept looking around nervously. I must leave. Kofia, a voice boomed from behind Arya. Before Arya could turn, the cold of a weapon touched the back of her head. Juram, what are you doing here? Kofia asked. Turim is dead. Joram scowled. These vile humans killed him. Kofia looked stunned. Impossible. The humans can't kill us. I don't know what happened, but I saw his remains, Joram said. He must have been forced to do a self-initiation. Arya was confused by the conversation between the two Vazat aliens, but she was able to discern that one of their own kind had been killed. If that turned out to be true, it would be a breakthrough for humanity. What are you doing talking to this human? Joram demanded. She caught me by surprise, Kofia replied calmly. I was pretending to tell her I'm here to help her while waiting for you. Joram snickered. Captain, I have so much to learn from you yet. Arya was impressed with Kofia. The female alien didn't show any signs of nervousness. Nonetheless, Arya's heart was pounding. Had the female Vazat alien tricked her all this time? Take her to the back and dispose of her, Kofia ordered. Don't do it here. I don't want to attract any more attention. There's one more human inside studying Mr. Griffith's body. I'll personally take care of him. Yes, Captain, Joram replied. I thought you wanted to help, Arya insisted. I lied, Kofia snickered. Arya glanced around. Her chances of surviving any attack were slim, especially with that Vazat alien pointed at her head. But she had to do something. She couldn't die here. Not like this. Joram grabbed her arm and turned her around. She didn't resist as her mind scanned for any possible way to escape. Her weapon was still in her holster, but she had no chance of reaching it. Joram then shoved her forward. As she walked down the side of the home along a small path, she heard a sound followed by a thud. Arya swirled only to find Joram's body on the ground. Kofia stood over him and shook her head in dismay. He shouldn't have come back here. That wasn't my instruction to him. I told him to get the other officer and head to the vessel. Arya's jaw dropped. You. Kofia holstered her weapon. Yes, I had to kill him. He saw me talking to you. Even though I gave him a story Joram likes to talk, he would eventually tell it to the rest of my kind, putting me in a lot of trouble. I thought you did lie to me. Kofia offered a smile. I had no choice but to improvise when Joram showed up. Arya looked down and was shocked to see that the body had dissolved into a purple pool of liquid. Kofia must have sensed her curiosity. Purple is the color of her blood. That explains a lot, Arya said as her heart returned to its normal rhythm. All the shock of believing that the female Vazat had tricked her had evaporated. For Kofia to kill one of her own kind to save Arya was a big step forward. Arya was relieved that her instincts about Kofia had been right. I hope I have gained a bit more of your trust, Kofia said. Arya nodded. There wasn't much else to say. It was the first time a known enemy had saved her life from death. She never imagined it, but there's always a first time for everything. Arya was sure of one thing. The whole experience would leave a deep impression on her. Arya then motioned for her to enter the home. They stepped inside and walked over to where Monroe was crouching. He had covered Mr. Griffith's body with a covering. We'll need to get the medics here, Monroe said. Call it in, Arya ordered. Monroe walked away to the front of the home while Kofia turned to her. I want you to think of my proposal to help you. I know you can't decide on it yourself without checking with your commanding officer, but think about it seriously. I want to stop all this madness, and I believe you want to do the same. If you agree to work with me, I'll be at this position in 2 days' time. Kofia passed her the coordinates of her position. Where's your base? Arya asked. I can't reveal that until I know you're willing to work with me, Kofia replied. What do the Vazat want with us? Arya asked. We are planning for a full-scale invasion of your planet. Chapter 32, Cockpit, Fighter Ship. Squadron Leader Thomas studied his sensors. It still showed nothing, although an unknown vessel was on an intercept course with him. But the view through his view screen didn't lie. An unknown vessel was slowly approaching them. Why is it moving slowly? Wilmore asked. I don't know. Ensure your weapons are ready. Then Thomas's comms buzzed. It was General Duncan. Thomas had sent the general an alert on the presence of an unknown vessel. General Duncan's voice came through loud and clear. What's the status out there? The vessel is still a distance away and has slowed down. It could be monitoring our defenses. Shall we engage with it? Thomas asked. Engage and find out more about the vessel, Duncan ordered. My guys at the base studying the alien vessel had found a weakness in its shields. I'll send the details over now. If you need to use it, do it. I don't want that vessel getting any closer to our base. Affirmative, Thomas replied and ended the comms. What's the plan, sir? Wilmore asked. Thomas briefed him and then pulled on his controls. His fighter ship lurched forward to the unknown vessel. At the same time, Thomas read through the details that the general had sent him. If this was an alien vessel, they would soon find out. Thomas had heard the rumors about the shields around the captured alien vessel. However, Senior Combat Engineer Taylor's discovery was a pleasant surprise. The vessel still holding its position, Wilmore admitted. Copy that. As their vessels continued to close the distance with the unknown vessel, Thomas picked up on the early signs that it belonged to the Vazat. The hull and its shape were clear evidence. The vessel wasn't something that belonged to anyone on Earth. As if on cue, Wilmore's words flooded his headset. It's the aliens. Keep it steady, Thomas warned. Are your sensors picking up anything? Nothing, sir. Then red alerts flared across Thomas's console. We got missiles incoming. Take evasive actions now. Thomas veered off without even waiting to hear from his lieutenant. The incoming missiles were moving faster than he expected. He pulled on his controls and his fighter ship climbed. Thomas eyed his sensors. One of the missiles was on his tail. His fighter ship kept climbing until he released the countermeasures and then pushed hard on the controls. His fighter ship began barreling down back to the surface. An explosion could be heard in the distance. Thomas returned his attention to the sensors. The missile was gone. Lieutenant, Thomas said, I managed to get rid of my missile too, Wilmore shouted, a bit too much glee in his voice. Thomas navigated his fighter ship back towards the alien vessel. He narrowed his eyes. He still hadn't moved. Sir, what are your orders? Wilmore asked. Fire upon it, Thomas ordered. Target the location I'm sending you. It's a weakness in his shields. Thomas hoped Senior Combat Engineer Taylor's discovery was correct. If not, they would have wasted their missiles on the alien vessel. Chapter 33, Coffee Shop, Anderson. Captain Williams found it ironic that he was back in the same coffee shop from a few hours ago. Even the barrister had taken a double take when he had stepped in with Lucas' men. Seated at one corner with Lucas, Williams took a sip of his coffee. I must say the coffee is not bad, Lucas mused. I still can't believe your father had the courage to trap the Vazat in a treaty. Lucas grinned. What's worse is that it happened right under the nose of the authorities. No one knew about it. That's our assumption, but it may not be true, Williams remarked. Lucas leaned back and looked deep in thought. Now that you put it like that, I need to find out who else knew of this men treaty. Sorry to say, but I don't think this was a one-man operation. Other people had to be involved. Even 30 years ago, the Vazat would have been a formidable adversary. Humanity evolved fast when the factions had arisen. With that, competition increased, opening the door for new forms of innovation, most of which was funneled to military uses. Each faction had wanted to secure any advantage they could against the others. It became an arms race within the continent. I still think humanity is far off from alien technology, Lucas said. Again, are we sure of that? What's to say that Tudor men didn't extract the Vazat technology? Lucas sighed. Nothing at all. You remind me a lot of him. Williams frowned. Who? Your older brother. An awkward silence descended upon the table. Williams had known that the conversation would eventually deviate to his brother. He had hoped to keep it at bay as much as possible, but agreeing to a coffee with Lucas implied the topic of Duncan would come up. Oh, Williams said, trying his best to avoid talking about his brother. Your brother was in the military when I first ran into him, Lucas said. At that time, I was young and brash, and I had just left the military. You were in the military? Does that surprise you? Lucas smirked. A bit. For a short stint, but it was something my father never approved of. So I knew I could only stay for a while. But it was amazing with my brothers in arms. I could never ask for a better opportunity to bond with people. Meaning they didn't know your identity, huh? Lucas shook his head with a smile. That's why it was the perfect time. All of them made me go through tough training and all, without any one of them knowing I was a Ment family member. Williams was impressed with Lucas. For someone from a privileged background to enlist and thrive was remarkable. Military training hardened a person and their mental capacity. It was tough, but Williams never regretted enlisting. The military had made him who he was today, and he was grateful for it. Coming back to Duncan, Lucas said, honestly, it's better we don't talk about him. Why not? Did you know he spoke about you? Williams' head jerked back. He spoke about me with you? Williams was confused as to why his brother would talk to a stranger about him. It didn't make sense. Not at the time he met me, but later on, Lucas corrected. You see, Duncan saw something in me and we forged this friendship over the years. Even my father approved of it. It was one of the few things my father approved of. Anyway, my point is that from what I heard from Duncan, I realized he was proud of you. William struggled to control his emotions. Keeping the door closed on his brother all these years had been easy, especially after their falling out following their father's funeral. It was easy to compartmentalize things, at least for a guy. But in recent days, things have spiraled out of control. First, it had been because of the meeting with Duncan at the base. Williams never expected it. Of all people, what were the chances that he would meet his brother? Williams knew there were many generals across the United Alliance, but the odds were really against him on that day. And now, meeting Lucas Ment, who was friends with his brother, was another surprise. It appeared his days of running away from his older brother had come to an end. Williams suppressed a sigh. I know this is difficult to talk about, Lucas said. One thing I want to be upfront about is this. Your brother said only good things about you. I don't know what happened after that or what's going on between you and him. I didn't even have the time to come to your father's funeral. Williams offered a weak smile. He appreciated Lucas Ment being candid with him. For a multi-millionaire innovator, the man was quite down to earth. Chapter 34, Bridge, Vazat 167A. Captain Sooty, the two human vessels are firing up their weapons, the junior officer reported. Sooty grinned. Let them try to fire upon us, Lieutenant. Rupert, I want the humans to see our capabilities. Sooty had intentionally brought out his vessel with one objective, to test humanity's capabilities, at least those belonging to the United Alliance faction. Sooty was aware of the different human factions. The only two factions of concern for him were the United Alliance and the Coalition forces. Both these factions had large numbers of troops and equipment and may pose a challenge for the incoming Vazat invasion. Even then, none of them had any spacefaring capabilities, at least not to his knowledge. Knocking out the only United Alliance space station had been further proof that humanity was a weak species, unlike those species that the Vazat had fought and defeated across the galaxy. Nonetheless, Sooty wasn't going to take chances. He needed to know humanity's capabilities. Over the last 30 years, he spent a lot of time studying human history and observing the factions. If anything, the humans were persistent. They never gave up. They were willing to die to the end, even in the face of impossible odds. That human spirit was dangerous. Not all species out there had it. In fact, very few had that kind of tenacity. Missiles incoming, the junior officer reported. Do I take evasive actions? Negative. The junior officer looked at him with a puzzled expression. Sooty was forced to explain his thinking. I want the humans to realize they can't penetrate our shields. That will make them feel hopeless. Another thing that Sooty had learned about humanity was his intense reliance on emotions. Humanity was very emotional. They were unable to keep their emotions in check. That was a glaring weakness for humanity, one that he hoped to take advantage of. He had observed countless occasions when humans would let their emotions get the better of them and embroil themselves in arguments or fights. Sometimes it was for the simplest of things which Sooty could never understand. It was unbecoming of a Vazat to drop to such a level. Then the bridge door opened and Martin, a young man, stepped in. Captain Sooty, Martin, you're just in time to witness the power of the Vazat against your human race, Sooty announced. Martin was one of many humans who had willingly joined the Vazat over the years. Sooty had befriended Martin and convinced him of the Vazat cause to bring peace to Earth. Martin had been disillusioned by the constant conflicts in the continent. So much so that Martin hadn't been shocked by the presence of the Vazat. Instead, he had embraced the Wizard wholeheartedly, which had been a shock to Sooty. Martin had then surprised him more by being able to recruit others to join him and the Wizard. Missiles reaching us, the junior officer reported. A shudder rolled through the bridge. Sooty managed to tightly grip his seat at the last second and prevent himself from falling onto the floor. Martin wasn't as lucky. The man went flying to the floor. What happened? Sooty demanded. Their missiles penetrated our shields, the junior officer replied. Impossible, Sooty said. They're firing more missiles, the junior officer said. Get us out of here, Sooty ordered. Martin got to his feet and managed to sit down on a chair and strap himself in. How were they able to get through the shields? Sooty was fuming. He didn't know how the humans had managed to penetrate the shields. He had underestimated the humans. He had always been wary of humanity, and they had proven it today. The view screen changed as the vessel climbed into the sky. Releasing countermeasures, the junior officer admitted. The vessel lurched forward as Sooty turned to Martin. Your species is creative. They must have found a weakness in our shields. But how is that even possible? Martin asked. They do have one of our vessels, Sooty mused. He should have expected the humans to have studied the captured vessel for weaknesses. That was a mistake. Sooty couldn't afford to repeat it, not against humanity, not with so much at stake. Do you want me to activate my spy within the base? Martin asked. Sooty wrestled with the decision. Yes, do it. Martin had been instrumental in gaining favor with someone inside the United Alliance base. It was time now to find out more about what they were up to. Chapter 35, General's Office, United Alliance 1. Duncan was pleased with the update from Squadron Leader Thomas. I'm happy you were able to send a message to the Vazat aliens. Yes, sir, Thomas said. Once we hit their vessel, they ran with their heads between their tails. I think it caught them by surprise. What do you think they were doing out there? I believe they were testing our capabilities. I was glad it was my turn out there when the alien vessel showed up. Duncan had also guessed as much. The Vazat were getting bolder in their engagements with humanity. The Vazat didn't seem to care whether people saw them or not. It also implied that the aliens were preparing for something. Sir, if I may say something. Go ahead. I believe the aliens are on a timeline to do something big. If not, they wouldn't be so active so quickly. Everything I heard from you and my engagement with the alien vessel points to something coming. I agree. Thank you for the update. Thomas stood and left his office. Duncan typed off a message and sent it to the United Alliance Council. A buzz at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Come in. Captain Arias stepped in and took a seat in front of him. It's about time, Duncan said. I've been waiting to hear from you. Aria had sent him short updates on her encounter with the Vazat. Duncan had been stunned by the things happening in Anderson. Sir, did you get my reports? Aria asked. Why don't you give me the detailed update? Aria then went into a long explanation of everything that had happened since she and Monroe had arrived in Anderson. Duncan listened carefully until she finished. So, do you think this Kofia is genuine in wanting to help us? Duncan asked. I believe so, Aria said. Duncan struggled to control himself. He had feared the worst when he had received the reports from his captain. I think you made a mistake, Captain, Duncan commented. Aria cocked her head. Sir, the Vazat aliens are a cunning species. I don't think we should take what they say at face value. We can't trust them, not after everything they've done to us. But, sir, I'm not denying the fact that this alien saved your life, but have you considered the possibility that it was all part of an elaborate trap to get you to believe them? Aria's facial expression changed. I don't understand, sir. I'll admit that I also felt that Kofia was trying to deceive me, but it all changed when she killed one of her own. Have you considered whether it was part of the deception? I'm sure it wasn't. Duncan arched his eyebrows. You seem pretty sure about it. I would be able to tell if Kofia was lying to me. I think she is against what her species is trying to do to us. She did also reveal to us what the blinding white light is. Duncan offered a nod, which is good intelligence you gathered from her. But did she take you back to her vessel? Aria shook her head. I also didn't ask. A new ally wouldn't wait for you to ask. The ally would show you more willingly to build your trust. But she saved my life, Arya protested. Duncan heaved a loud sigh. I'll be honest with you, Captain. I was afraid this might happen. What might happen? That the alien being might be able to convince you of their agenda. You need to remember that we're dealing with alien beings. We don't know what they're capable of. Maybe they can read our minds. Arya paused for a long moment. Sir, I understand your concerns about this matter. If you had been there with me, maybe you would think otherwise. I wasn't there, so I must be objective about Kofia's proposal. My orders are that we don't engage with this female wizard. But, sir, that's an order, Captain. Arya lowered her head. Yes, sir. Get some rest. I want you to get a medical checkup as well. Then maybe take a day off or even more. You're dismissed. With that, Arya stood and left his office. Duncan pressed his lips into a thin line. He was disappointed with Captain Arya. The last thing he had expected was for her to be deceived by the wizard. He hoped she could reflect on her situation and overcome it. If anyone could get over it, it would be Arya. Chapter 36, Meeting Room, Wizard Base. Captain Kofia sat behind one end of the table and waited. Ever since her arrival, she had been dreading meeting Captain Sooty. However, there was no choice. She better get it over with as soon as possible. Kofia had sent Sooty an update on what had transpired in Anderson. Sooty hadn't replied to her. When Kofia had been forced to kill Juram, she didn't even hesitate. That was how far she had gone in planning a betrayal of her own kind. She was fed up with Captain Sooty and his ways. Sooty followed the Supreme Leader's orders to the letter, even when Sooty had been compelled to wait until the end of the Ment Treaty. Sooty had sulked around for years but eventually given in to the orders. Sooty would never cross the Supreme Leader's orders. A buzz at the door, and Sooty shuffled inside and took a seat in front of Kofia. I didn't believe it when I saw your report, Sooty said. How could we lose two of our kind to these pathetic humans? They have a new weapon and it stops us from transforming and moving, Kofia reported. What? I didn't put that in my report, but I overheard the humans talking about it before we attacked them. I thought I'd explain it to you in person. Kofia had been fortunate that Captain Arya had given her some intelligence to take back to her own kind. Kofia had been reluctant, but Arya had insisted on it. Kofia understood that the human captain was also taking a risk. Sooty frowned. What kind of weapon? Kofia shrugged. I don't know the details, but my best guess is that the humans are adapting to us, especially since they recovered our vessel. Sooty slammed his fist on the table. Kofia didn't flinch, maintaining a neutral expression. I'm not surprised because today I went out there in one of our vessels to test the humans' air capabilities, Sooty explained. Kofia was surprised by Sooty's mission. The fact that she hadn't been informed also rattled her. What happened? Something unexpected. They were able to penetrate our shields. Kofia gasped. I was also shocked, but we managed to seal that section of the vessel off and get away from the human fighter ships. Even then, the human fighter ships are rudimentary. They don't stand a chance against our vessels. But the humans found a weakness in our shields. It has to be from the captured vessel. I'm sure the humans must be happy that they chased us away. But they don't know what's coming. When a fleet of our vessels attack their bases, there'll be nothing left. I agree. Kofia sensed the anger simmering under Sooty's voice. Her captain had been humiliated by the humans. Everyone knew no one humiliated Captain Sooty and lived to tell their story. Sooty will already be planning his revenge. Is there any change in the timeline? Kofia asked. Sooty shook his head. The humans had a small victory today, but it won't last. We will keep to the timeline that the Supreme Leader planned for us. What about the moon base? Kofia asked. It's proceeding as planned. More of our vessels are slowly gathering over there. Are we sure the humans have no sensors to find our activity? Sooty laughed. I doubt the humans can find it. If they had, we would know of it already. We'll continue as planned. Keep me updated on any new developments. I need to speak to Martin now. Kofia nodded, stood and left the meeting room. Outside, she passed Martin, who acknowledged her before stepping into the room. Kofia didn't like Martin. The human had been able to get a lot of favor in Captain Sooty's eyes. That made Martin as dangerous as Sooty. Kofier would need to keep an eye on Martin. Chapter 37, Unknown Position, Gibson Desert. Captain Williams stepped out of the helipod. As his boots scraped against the rocky ground, his eyes scanned the harsh terrain. A few hours ago, he received instructions from General Stiles to meet him at this position. Nothing else had been said. Williams hadn't even had a chance to ask for any details. Now, it didn't matter. Despite that, his curiosity had been piqued by General Stiles' order. Prior to leaving, Williams had also checked and realized there were no coalition forces assets out here in this area. So whatever was going on, it was under the radar. Sir, the soldier with him said, "This way." Williams turned his gaze at where the soldier was pointing at. The mouth of a small cave stood a short distance away. Williams acknowledged and followed the soldier towards the mouth of the cave. Reaching the mouth of the cave, the soldier came to a halt. Williams frowned. Then the soldier pulled out a device and pointed it at the cave. A force field that had been in place disappeared, leaving Williams speechless. "Soldier, what's this place?" Williams asked. "I'm not supposed to say anything, sir," the soldier replied. "Please go in. At the end of the cave wall, there's a corridor. I'll be waiting here for you." Williams nodded and stepped into the cave. It was cooler than he had expected. He walked briskly until he spotted the corridor extending from the back of the cave. Williams flicked his eyes about before stepping into the corridor, which was lined with metal on either side. He kept walking as the corridor twisted and turned until he reached a metal door. Williams stopped at the door and studied the panel beside it. He pressed on it, and the door slid open with a hiss. Williams' eyes widened as he stepped into a large structure similar to a hangar bay, with white walls. From this vantage point, Williams couldn't even see the other end of the structure, but he froze at the sight before him. Multiple sleek vessels stood around with engineers in jumpsuits and soldiers running about. It was unbelievable. "Captain Williams," a voice boomed from his left. Williams turned only to find General Stiles seated on a chair. Williams saluted the general, who saluted him back. "At ease, Captain." "Sir, what's going on?" Williams asked, confused. "I'm glad you made it." General Stiles looked a bit more tired than expected, but that was natural considering the man was hitting his late 60s already. Stiles served the military in the unified government before transitioning to the coalition forces. The man was well respected with a lot of people. "I asked you to come here to show you this," Stiles announced. "Are those vessels what I think they are?" Williams asked as the hum of machinery reached his ears. "Yes, those are our first-generation space vessels," Stiles said with a hint of pride in his voice. The sleek vessels stood in majesty. They were clearly built for speed, but there were two variations, one sleek and the other a bit bulkier to carry multiple passengers. The vessels' hulls looked like they were made of something Williams had never seen before. Williams was still reeling from the discovery. "Ever since the United Alliance put up a space station, we've been secretly working on these vessels," Stiles said. "We didn't want to replicate what the other factions were doing. We wanted to leapfrog them." Stiles walked towards the first vessel and Williams kept pace with him. Reaching the first vessel, it took Williams' breath away. "We are moving away from the traditional battlefield," Stiles admitted, "and it's a timely one with the appearance of the Vazat alien species." Williams offered a nod. All his life he had spent time mastering ground warfare. In the blink of an eye that had changed. No longer were they going to be confined to the ground. A new battlefield in the stars was opening. "How many of these vessels do we have?" Williams asked. "We're building them at a separate facility as quickly as we can, but I can't reveal the location due to security reasons." "Security reasons?" "My sources tell me that there are humans who are willingly working with the Vazat." Williams gasped. "I know. I was as shocked as you when I first heard about it. But then when I thought about it a bit more, I realized it wasn't impossible. If there were misguided humans who were against the factions or the wars and thought the Vazat could help them, these humans might believe the aliens." Williams turned his gaze back to the vessel. "Do we have pilots for these vessels?" "We are training them, but it takes time. For those shuttle-like vessels, it's faster for us because they're easier to navigate. I'm sure you could also fly them." Williams was taken aback by his words. I'm not kidding, Captain. It's time for the coalition forces to arise and conquer space. I understand. How long has this place been operational? Once we found out about the space station, we decided to do our part to get into space, Styles replied. We couldn't let the other factions have a leg up on us. I mean, they could also be developing on their spacefaring vessels. We haven't heard anything, but it's possible. The reason I brought you here is not to just show you what we're doing. I want you to take command of the pilots. Your extensive experience on the battlefield will be instrumental for us. We'll arrange for someone else to take over your duties back at the base. Williams nodded. He had never expected this new opportunity from the general, but as his eyes fell upon the sleek vessel, a new hunger began to arise within him. He was about to head into space sooner than he could have ever imagined. Chapter 38, Vazat Base, Granite Valley. Coffee walked down the corridor heading towards the other end of the base. It was nighttime. Captain Sooty would be resting, so would the humans. However, Coffee had made it a habit to walk the base to ensure everything was in order. That habit had come to good use when she wanted to check in on the prisoners. She glanced back every few seconds, not wanting to have an audience as she stepped out of the building and walked over to the prison building. This was her last stop on her walk. It always was. Once Coffee ran into Captain Sooty, who had been pleased with her night walks. He said it gave him great confidence that their base was secure. At that time, Coffee hadn't known how much use her night walks would end up being. Now it helped her in the final preparation to save the prisoners and stop her own kind's evil plans for humanity. She approached the front door of the prison building, tapped on the panel, and the door slid open with a hiss. Coffee stepped into a foyer with a corridor stretching ahead. On either side of the corridor were prison cells. She walked to the edge of the corridor and leaned in. Some of the cells had young humans who had been snatched by her kind to force their parents to work for them. Mr. Griffith's daughter, Kathy, was inside of these cells. Coffee sighed at the methods the species had adopted. Coffee would need the help of these humans to turn the tides on her own species and destroy this base. She checked around without informing the prisoners of her presence and stepped back out of the prison building. Checking her device, she realized there was one more day before she was to meet Captain Arya. Hopefully, the human captain had gotten consent from her commanding officer for the meeting. Coffee looked up into the night sky. The stars were bright. She had never witnessed such stars in her homeworld. Earth was unique in that sense. Humanity was fortunate to have this planet. While the Vazat homeworld was a good place to live, it couldn't be compared to Earth. Humanity didn't know how lucky they had been to be bestowed with this planet. Many alien species out there in the galaxy lived under harsh, desolate conditions. But she couldn't let species destroy this planet in an invasion. Coffee knew well enough that the humans would fight back. Their fighting spirit was stronger than many alien species she had encountered. That alone would make the invasion a long, bitter fight. She hoped to avoid that at all costs. Coffee turned and walked back to her quarters. Time was running out for her and everyone. Chapter 39, Highway 20, Eastern Plains. Captain Arya drove her transport pod into a parking lot beside the highway. She pulled it up into a parking slot and switched off the engine. She continued to grip the console as she stared at the park and trees in front of her. Ever since that day with General Duncan, Arya had been struggling with herself. She had never been in such a state. She still couldn't understand why the general had shut her down. It was so unlike him. Arya knew he was looking after her welfare, but why was he dead set against believing her words? She thought she had earned his trust over her time at the base, but now it appeared that all had been in vain. After the meeting, Arya had gone for a medical checkup and been given a clean bill of health. The doctor had given her a strange look. However, Arya hadn't explained anything except asking him to send the report to the general. The medic had nodded and Arya had retreated to her quarters. Sergeant Monroe had come looking for her, but Arya had shunned him. She hadn't wanted to dredge up anything regarding Anderson. It wouldn't help matters, and she also didn't want to get Monroe in trouble. Today she was happy to get an off day, not 1 but 2 days. She had applied for it in the system. Arya was certain the general would be pleased that she was following his instructions, even if it made no sense. A few of her friends at the base were surprised she was taking a few days off, but Arya had politely said she needed to take care of a few family things. Again, she didn't want to bring anyone into her situation. Humanity was on the brink of a full-on invasion by the Vizard. Yet General Duncan had chosen not to link up with Kofia. It defied logic. The general's opinion of the Vizard had caused Arya to begin questioning her own senses. Had she been wrong? Had the Vizard aliens done something to her? Was General Duncan right in his assessment of her? Arya couldn't accept it. There was something wrong here. Despite the general's misgivings, Arya knew that she had made the right judgment about Kofia. The female alien had saved her life. No reason to do it other than prove she was trustworthy. If it did end up being a great deception, Arya would accept it as a serious lapse in her judgment and resign from the United Alliance. But she wasn't at that point, not by a long shot. It had to be proven. She had to prove to herself and the general that she was right about Kofia. It was the only way forward for her. She couldn't pretend like everything was okay and continue with life. She also didn't know if the general would trust her again in the daily operations. She closed her eyes. Had she just sunk her career? That was one outcome from the entire encounter with the Vizard. Had that been Kofia's endgame, to mess with Arya's mind and cause a divide between her and the general? Arya frowned, pondering a little longer than necessary on the thought. She had been tempted to call her parents, but she didn't want to make them worried about her. Her parents had been so proud of her accomplishments. Every month, Arya would have a talk with them or drive out to meet them. Her parents were always encouraging her. Arya sighed. Every time she met her parents, one thing resonated with her. They would always tell her to go with her gut instincts. That was how she had gotten so far in life. She had topped in the military academy, blowing past everyone. Then her promotions came quickly within the military. In all those instances, her gut instinct had been her compass, nothing else. And now she was faced with the reality of questioning herself. She had to stop herself. She kept repeating to herself that there was nothing wrong with her. It would do no good to keep dwelling on it. She opened the door and stepped out of her transport. It felt good to breathe the fresh air. It always helped her clear her mind. She took a short walk down a trail, enjoying the peacefulness of nature. Fortunately, she didn't pass anyone else walking about. At a few points along the trail, Arya stopped and just studied the towering trees around her. These trees were a testament to the longevity of Earth. It only hardened her resolve that Earth was worth fighting for. Returning to her transport pod, Arya realized one thing. She had decided on the next course of action. She would meet Kofia without telling anyone about it. Going against her general's orders was the last thing she would ever do, but desperate times call for desperate measures. General Duncan didn't get it, which was unfortunate for him. Arya felt a large weight lift off her shoulders as she stepped into her transport pod and drove back onto the highway. Chapter 40, General's Office, United Alliance 1. Duncan tapped his left foot for a few seconds. He didn't enjoy what he was about to do. He hated being forced to it. It was the last thing he ever imagined doing. He clicked on his console and opened the comms with General Stiles from the coalition forces. Duncan knew of his reputation and felt it was time to make a connection. A common enemy demanded it from him. He couldn't hide behind his own pride any longer. Humanity's survival was at stake. A voice boomed through Duncan's office. General Duncan, I've been waiting to hear from you. Duncan jerked his head back. You don't have to sound so surprised, Stiles said. But ever since our two factions agreed upon a ceasefire, I was wondering how long it would take for you to reach out to me. Duncan didn't like the implication. Why did he have to reach out to Stiles? Why couldn't it have been the other way? Despite that, Duncan kept quiet on the matter. I understand. So how can I help you? Stiles scoffed. We both have a new enemy, Duncan began. The Vizard aliens aren't our enemies, Stiles corrected. They are humanity's enemies. In case you haven't figured it out yet, their mission here is obvious. To destroy us. Annihilate us. Nothing short will satisfy them. How can you be so sure? I've seen all sorts of enemies in my lifestyles hum. All of them have the same psyche. The Vazad is no different. They haven't come to us with a peace offering. Excuse me, General, but we're dealing with aliens, not human enemies. We can't know what the Vazad are thinking or how they perceive us. Duncan didn't want to add that General Stiles hadn't even had any personal encounters with the Vazad, unlike him. How could the man be so confident of the enemy? If the Vazad was coming in peace, they wouldn't have destroyed your space station, Duncan. An awkward silence stretched between them. Don't try to deny it, Stiles said. We both know it was the Vazad who did it, and you know many of my soldiers were also killed in the process. Duncan frowned. For the space station, I don't have concrete. Stiles cut in. What more do you need? A light hit your shuttle and it rammed your space station. Connect the dots. It was the Vazad. General Stiles was well known in the military establishment across the unified government, and the factions were being direct. When Duncan had been in the military academy, one of his modules had been related to strategies that Stiles had used on the battlefield. Duncan had no doubt that Stiles was brilliant in the art of warfare, but nothing in the academy trained them for aliens. Even then, Stiles was persistent in his conclusions. Duncan suppressed a sigh. This was why he hadn't wanted to make the call to General Stiles. Let's assume it was them then, Duncan said. That's the starting point for you, but I'm way ahead now. Duncan tried to steer the conversation back on track. The reason for my call is that we should work together. Of course we should, but I have a more important question for you, which is, can we really work together? Stiles asked. Duncan frowned. The conversation began to leave him with a big headache. He didn't need this now. For humanity's sake, we must, Duncan said. That's the right answer I was looking for. I'll get our captains to start working together. I assume your side will fully cooperate. Yes, Duncan said and ended the comms. He was more than relieved to finish talking to General Stiles. Duncan hoped he wouldn't have more such conversations, but he knew better than that. Chapter 41, United Alliance 1, Eastern Plains. Private Santiago stood outside the alien vessel. It was a magnificent piece of work. He had been thrilled when he had been assigned to examine it with Taylor, but now he had something more significant and dangerous to do. New orders, not from the United Alliance. Martin had left him an encrypted message with the orders. When he had been recruited by Martin during one of his trips back home, the man had been able to convince him of the cause. Santiago had felt the adrenaline rushing through him when he realized he was able to help Martin and the Vazad aliens. It was time to end all these conflicts. Humanity needed to get back on track. The power plays by the greedy factions were disruptive and had killed so many innocents. It was time to end it all, once and for all. The end.